Hello. Should be audible now. Trying something a little bit different. I'm starting out on this sound only screen, but I will pull up something in a minute. I just want to make sure, I want to try and be able to get this as a thumbnail for the video because I don't want to get anybody's hopes up with the thumbnail. So if the thumbnail looked like gameplay, then I'm not playing. But I'm going to pull up a game now in a minute just for some comfy visuals. But yeah, I figured I'd trying some different stream types and stuff. And I thought I even wrote some things down to talk about. Imagine that. Wrote a few things down. One of the things that was on my mind, and I figured I might as well stream now as a result because I've only just watched it, is I was watching a video by Casey Muratori about DLSS. He was basically responding to a tweet that Notch put out, which wasn't really that important. Basically just saying, maybe DLSS is not very good or whatever. I was kind of expressing something similar on a recent stream about the idea that maybe game hardware is going the wrong way. And so Casey was kind of talking about this. It was a pretty long-winded video. He said as much himself, but he was doing it off the cuff, and hey, I'm worse in that regard. And it was interesting because the end result did seem to be that it's plausible that if you were to drop DLSS hardware and stuff from graphics cards, that there could be some minor performance benefit in other ways as a result of dropping that hardware. Which is kind of what I was talking about on a prior stream. I was worried that maybe game hardware is kind of going the wrong way. And I don't know enough about this. I'm certainly no technical wizard or anything like that. Even Casey in that video, he's a much more experienced programmer than I am, much. But even he was saying that he doesn't know a lot about the hardware end of things, and so he's not entirely sure about what he's saying. One thing that popped into my mind when I was watching this was I was thinking about Mark Cerny's talk, which was the PS5 Pro technical seminar that came out about a year ago, where he talked a little bit about the future of game hardware and all that kind of stuff. I think Cerny seems like a nice guy and certainly knows what he's doing, but I think maybe it was slightly misleading in a way, because rewatching it, basically I rewatched that and I was looking for contradictions between the two things, right? I was looking for a contradiction between this idea that DLSS is, the implication is that DLSS is the way forward, right? Or these pieces of hardware, or whatever they are the way forward for game graphics. And I wanted to see if anything. So basically, Casey Muratori was saying that's maybe not necessarily, or like, I don't want to put words in his mouth. You can go watch it. It was interesting. I don't know what it was called, but he has a Substack called Computer Enhance, which I think most of that is behind a paywall, so I don't really engage with it. But he puts stuff out for free sometimes, and I thought that was an interesting thing where he was talking about DLSS. I don't know what the name of it was, but it starts off basically talking about a tweet that Notch made recently. So anyway, yeah, I was looking for contradictions between what they said, and I feel like the PS5 Pro talk starts off talking about, there's basically two sort of counterpoints that were made in Mark Cerny's talk, going back to rewatch that. So the first one is that the talk was for the PS5 Pro, right, which has specific goals, and one of those goals was making sure that developers would not have to put a lot of thought into how they use this hardware in order to get more out of it, because the the goal is to have basically the same games release on the PS5 and the PS5 Pro. It's not a true generational change, and therefore they wanted to minimize the amount of developer workload. So when you view DLSS and related technologies like that, Casey was saying that the basically the spatial and temporal resolution things that they do with the DLSS are all running on the same hardware. I don't know about that, but anyway, so Mark Cerny was saying that this makes it easy for developers to support both pieces of hardware, basically, because we're expecting the same game to launch on this. We don't want to cause developers a lot of hardware. So then the open question is, would the same thing be true of the PS6, right? So maybe if you were doing the PS6 and you had perfect control over the hardware, which they don't because they collaborate with AMD, AMD seems maybe more willing to. I don't know. I don't know enough about these companies. You kind of get the impression that Nvidia is on its own kind of runaway track now, where it's dictating the terms, basically. So I don't know whether or not, if you were to be designing the PS6 and had complete perfect control over it and was trying to make the absolute best hardware you could, would you drop that stuff and then try to, put more hardware in for basic, whatever we want to call it, traditional rendering or traditional rasterization? Now, the second point that Mark Cerny made, which was interesting, which I had kind of forgotten, but was interesting, and is maybe the best defense of these technologies in general, is just that when you render fewer pixels, you can make them higher quality pixels, right? This screen has been on long enough, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reveal the game that I have going here, but we're basically just using this as a background, so don't get excited, okay? I just thought maybe some nice visuals would be nice, and I have the sound turned off or very low on the game, okay? I'll show the game. Just thought it would be a nice hangout game. All right, we're chilling out in Vice City, but we're not going to actually do anything in the game except maybe drive around to another vista or two. So the argument was, you can create higher quality pixels, by which I assume he means stuff like you can do ray tracing on them, or you can do whatever other technologies that you have to try and improve the quality of those pixels. He was using a screenshot of Ratchet and Clank. So, for example, maybe if you are trying to render the game in 4K, you can't render Ratchet's 4 correctly, right? So it's not just ray tracing. And that is kind of an interesting argument in favor of stuff like DLSS. Personally, I'm not a fan of the technology. There are some reasons for me not being a fan of it that I'm not going to get into right now. I've been biting my tongue on it for a long time, and I'm hoping that I won't have to do that much longer. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very much in the camp which is skeptical about these things. I suppose one of the most interesting things that Casey said came right at the very end. I can't remember exactly what he said, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, so this may not be exactly related to what he said, but basically you get the impression that hardware is taking software developers' jobs at a kind of root level where maybe it shouldn't be in certain ways. Again, I'm not a hardware guy, and I'm definitely not a technical wizard. I would love to get better at programming, and I hope to over the years. I don't want to down talk myself too much. I release my own little game and its own little engine and all that kind of stuff, but it's really not a complicated game, and it's not a complicated engine, right? So maybe my opinion on this would evolve if I had more information, but it's just, yeah, I just wonder about game hardware. I've been wondering about this for a while now because of the fact that the Switch 2 was imminent. That's when I started thinking about it, was maybe a couple of years ago, when it seemed pretty obvious that the Switch 2 was going to have some kind of upscaling technology in it or something like that. And there's when developers have technology like that. Okay, let's come up with a hypothetical here that makes sense. You have this technology in your graphics card, right? And if you're not, let's just imagine, this is the impression that I got, certainly from what Casey was saying, but I'm not entirely sure, right? But let's imagine that if you're not using DLSS or frame gen or whatever you want to call it, right? If you're not using those certain technologies, then certain areas of the graphics card are going unused, right? If you're a developer working on the next mainline Zelda game, that is not a good thing, right? That's not something that you're comfortable with. The same is true for other developers as well. Of course, if you're working on a first party Sony game, if you're working at Naughty Dog or Sony Santa Monica or something like that, one of those developers that really prides themselves on their technical excellence, just allowing um, certain amounts of the graphics card to go unused is not going to be acceptable to you. Thank you, Alf. I'll get back to your question in a bit. You're not going to be comfortable letting certain parts of the graphics card go unused. Therefore, either you're going to be incentivized to use these upscaling technologies in your game in order to try and get the most mileage out of the graphics card, or you're going to have to try and do something else with the technology that was not allowed. And there are cases of this, again, to use Naughty Dog as an example. Back in the day, I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe the PS2, the original launch version of the PS2, had a PS1 chip inside of it. Actually, it was all PS2s. All PS2s had a PS1 chip inside of it. I'm getting mixed up with the PS3, where it was only certain models had the backwards compatible chips in it. But if I'm correct, I believe all versions of the PS2 had a PS1 chip in it for backwards compatibility. And again, I could be wrong, but I think it was specified by Sony that you're not allowed to use that chip for anything, but Naughty Dog developers broke the rules and used it for some graphic stuff on the Jak and Daxter games. I might be wrong about that. But, like the reason that they felt tempted to do that was because there's extra power sitting in there in the console that's not being used. We're just going to use it, right? So I was a bit more concerned about this in terms of Nintendo, because Nintendo consoles did not have this technology until just recently. And we still don't know how it's going to affect their games in the long term. As somebody who's not a fan of this technology, first of all, I think it's always been overstated. Now, granted, I don't have a good computer, and I'm playing with the PS5 versions of these things, which my understanding is they're quite downgraded. But, I've seen little videos of people talking about how this new version of DLSS is much better than the last one and all that. And I think when you look at videos of it in action, it's just not good. People say it's better than the prior version, but it's still not actually good. It's still smeary shit, guesswork pixels. And so the question is, like, when this stuff gets put into games, either developers are going to have to use it, or they're going to have to try and do something on those pieces of hardware, if that's even possible, that they're not supposed to. And that creates a backwards compatibility nightmare as well. So it seems like it opens up all of these problems that I'm not a big fan of. I don't know if I have anything more to contribute to this conversation other than that. I was surprised when I went back to watch Mark Cerny's thing. Now, this one came out over a year ago, and I kind of expected to see it contradict what Casey was saying in his video, and it didn't quite, because it was specifically talking about the PS5 Pro. And again, that thing about higher quality pixels is maybe a good argument, but I don't know. What struck me, again, not being a hardware guy, watching Mark Cerny's video, they were talking about something like 300 TOPS, which is 300 trillion operations per second, I believe, in this kind of super sampling technology and all that. And I just think surely there's a better use for that, you know? If this technology is there, it just seems like there must be a way to get mileage out of that. That makes more sense. That's just my gut feeling. I'll give you an example. One reason why I believe that to be my gut feeling, right? Um, I've kind of wanted to write about this for a while. I don't know what form this would take, like a quick say or a micro video or something. So I might still do this in a more elegant form at some point. But one of the things I do every once in a while is I can't say that I'm a huge fan or very knowledgeable. But one thing I do is I go and I look at demo scene videos, right? I just think they're kind of interesting. You know, they're obviously one reason I find them interesting is because they're game adjacent, right? They're not really games, most of them at least, maybe all of them. They're not really games, but they're game adjacent in that they run on game hardware and they're trying to push game hardware in various ways. If you're not familiar with demo scene videos, I won't go about. And no, I'm not talking about Mario 128. That's a tech demo, which I suppose is sort of similar. There is a similar thing going on with stuff like that Zelda tech demo. I forget what it was called, Space World or the Mario 128. They're kind of similar in a way, but I'm talking about proper demo scene videos. If you just look up demo scene, you'll see what I'm talking about. To give you a brief overview, it's developers making advanced visual tricks and stuff for typically for old hardware and often within very tight memory constraints, right? And so they use certain tricks that are sometimes you can see through the magic and see what they're doing, which looks very impressive, but actually behind the scenes, it's just some very simple mathematics like, you know, sine waves and all that kind of stuff, right? But I've been struggling with this for a while. Up until recently, I think I kind of worked it out. I couldn't help but feel that even though the technical mastery of something is not really what I find interesting about it, I do think that a lot of the best games actually do push boundaries in some way. Like if you look at The Last Guardian, there's still nothing quite like Trico out there, you know, and that is a technical accomplishment, which is very impressive, especially considering the size of him. That you're seeing a close up on him basically all the time. If you think of it a different way, right? Most characters are not rendered on with that much area of the screen, and so the animation on him needed to be even more impressive as a result of the size that he would take up on the screen all the time. But anyway, so there's a kind of beauty in that, right? Even regardless of the fact that Trico is this creature that's meant to pull on your heartstrings, and the game is well constructed in other ways, and all that. Da, 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 da. Same for Shadow of the Colossus. Same for Eco to a lesser extent, I would say, but Shadow of the Colossus certainly. There's a technical aspect to games like that, and many others in many other ways, which is kind of beautiful in a way that I was struggling to describe, and I'm not sure that I fully am on board with this, right? Um, but I don't know. This is a line of thought that I was uh, having made Logic Bombs, or around the time I made Logic Bombs. I think it was honestly around the time I was wrapping up the development of it. But I'm actually not all that drawn to, say, modern games that release on old hardware. I think it's novel and kind of interesting in a way, and it's kind of nice to see old platforms get new games. But that wasn't really what compelled me to make Logic Bombs that way. I just thought that it would be nice to have a handheld Logic puzzle game, and why not make it for the Game Boy? Because if I make it for the Game Boy, it was kind of a personal constraint to help me wrangle myself and get something out the door, you know? And I tried to do what I could with it, and I got more interested in that aspect of it over time. I actually thought, and I suppose the door is still not closed on this, but that it might be interesting to make another Game Boy game at some point. Um, just because I have knowledge of the hardware now, although a lot of that's gone, even just after, you know, it's been, well, it's been about 4 months, let's say, since I touched the Game Boy version last. Um, but I think my view on it has evolved a little bit, where it shouldn't be surprising if we find something beautiful about taking a game and making it run with the smallest number of computing resources that the game could effectively use, like or needed, right? Optimization. You can think of it as optimization, right? And Logic Bombs is not a very good example of this, but if you look at something like Link's Awakening, right? Link's Awakening is a Game Boy game. It's much more technically impressive. And it's just like, if you think about that game on some kind of deeper fundamental level about the way that it exists as a thing in our world or interacts with, or I don't know. It's like it is the smallest or close to the smallest, most optimized possible representation of its idea. The fact that it runs on a Game Boy and it's this charming little adventure game which actually has little moments in it that are quite nice and beautiful in their own way. I think this is maybe getting too deep into the weeds, but it ultimately relates back to the idea of entropy. I talked a little bit about this in a quick say that I made called The Ultimate, where I was talking about Smash Bros. And the future of gaming and stuff. And that's become more relevant sooner than I expected because of the way that AI has caused graphics hardware to explode in price. But anyway, yeah, I think given that entropy is what it is, right, that there is seemingly some limit on the amount of stuff that you can do before all the energy in the universe is expended, then it's not really surprising for us to find something elegant and beautiful about taking a game concept, and representing, and not just representing it in some abstract way, right, but doing an actually good version of the game concept with the minimum amount of computing resources that should take. And this is where these DLSS and machine learning approaches kind of trigger alarm bells in my head and say that we're going in the wrong direction with them because they don't seem to be doing that, right? Now, I could be wrong. I actually think one of the ways that people are mistaken when they talk about AI is they kind of discount the human mind a little bit too much. We've been shaped over a very long evolutionary period, and I think if you look at our brains on the whole, they seem to be pretty efficient. They're doing a lot of complicated stuff with not a lot of energy expenditure, right? You just have to eat a bit of food every day to survive, and a lot of that goes towards running your body. Now, I suppose you could argue about how much your brain and your body need each other in order to work and all that kind of stuff, right? But if you're a brain in a vat, presumably you would need even less energy. So is there maybe some sense in which this stuff could become very efficient? Maybe. I get the feeling it's not there right now. And I just feel like the demo scene still seems to kind of contradict this, because I might as well just say it now. This is a point that I'll probably say again in Logic Bomb's commentary, but there's some sense in which no game has ever actually been fully optimized. Like maybe some very, very early game, but there's some sense in which there's probably a way beyond our comprehension of optimizing basically every game under the sun and getting the exact same output for less payoff. It's hard to articulate this to people who aren't programmers, but I think most programmers will understand what I mean. To use Logic Bombs as an example, sorry to go back to it all the time, but it's the one that I actually have technical knowledge of, but the behind the scenes. But if I had just ordered the tiles in that game differently, it could have been more efficient, right? And there's a trade-off there between, do I go back and reorder them again? Like I did reorder them several times during development. But do I go back and reorder them yet again, even though that means that because of the way the game is set up, I have to do the backgrounds manually and all the backgrounds are going to get fucked up again and da-da-da-da-da. And maybe if I reorder it again, I'll get it wrong and I'll have to do it again later. So, like I want to put this process off as long as I reasonably can. And then, we're now ready to release the game. So do I really want to go back and do that again? And who's to say I would even get it right in the first place? Um, Something like that is happening on pretty much every game, you know. I have not. I'm familiar with the guy Kaze Emanuer. I haven't watched his videos. I think I watched one somewhere along the way. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Um, I think this is a pretty well-known story at this point, but the Mario 64 was released without full optimization turned on the compiler, and maybe that was a mistake, maybe it wasn't. Blah blah blah. That's interesting, you know. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else I have to add other than just as somebody who is not an expert in the field, the way that hardware seems to be advancing for games is ringing alarm bells in my head. It doesn't quite feel right. Programmers would say it doesn't pass the sniff test, you know, it doesn't pass the sniff test. Something about it seems a little bit wrong to me. Um, yeah, the only other thing I would say is just that maybe hardware is driving some of these things, you know. Nvidia starts out as a game company, and then it turns out that this game stuff is kind of useful for machine learning. So then Nvidia pivots, but like it's just sad to me that these business realities dictate the way that games have to put their developers have to put their games together on a technical level, even though that may cause the game to suffer in the long run in terms of preservation and just regular efficiency and how much they can achieve with it. Not every developer is brushing up against those limitations, right? But very clear example is those newer Zelda games where they are clearly brushing up against the limitations of what the Switch can do. And or at least again, given bearing in mind what I said a minute ago about the fact that no game is truly optimized in that sort of mathematical sense of the word. Um, at least for a developer who is making games when the console is concurrent, is, you know, contemporary, they are brushing up against the constraints of what's feasible at all to do with that hardware, which means that the way that the hardware was put together impacted them in some way. And maybe it wasn't for the best, and maybe that's going to be true as well going forward, you know. So anyway, I just thought all that was interesting. I would recommend watching both of those things. Casey Muratori's talk, I should have written down the name of it. But also Mark Cerny's presentation, which was called PS5 Pro Technical Seminar. And by the way, it was a nice thing for them to put that out. Maybe they just did it to get ahead of misinformation and all that, which is a bigger problem these days. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was a nice thing for them to do anyway. Let me take a look at the chat again. To get back to you, Alf, I appreciate the super chat and all, but I think the reason that you haven't seen a follow up to the Demon Souls video is that nothing in my mind has changed. I don't feel the need to elaborate on it. And yes, I've played Elden Ring and Sekiro, but I don't really want to talk about them any further than I already kind of have. I actually raised a point in Elden Ring's favor in my context sensitivity video and the From Software games in general. There's a little bit about Sekiro in Meta Micro videos if you haven't seen that, but I don't really want to get into them anymore. It's like I said in the Demon Souls video, they haven't gone in a direction that I would like, so yeah. I had a few more things. Oh yeah, I should read some more chat because I was talking for... I was talking for so long. I'll drive to another... Will I drive somewhere else? Maybe we can just get a different camera. I'll just drive a little bit. We'll try and get another nice vista. Could go over to the lighthouse there. Yeah, why not? Let's hope we don't get a star for that. Okay, we don't. I only have the first island. This is a brand new save file, so we'll just leave it at that for a while. To look at the chat. I wasn't really looking at it. I was just talking with my wife about this concept this evening. I don't think we fully optimized any human invention or technology, but for some things we're probably close to 90% efficiency or so. I don't know about any human invention, but I certainly think for something as complicated as games, there's always just some things in there. And then there's always the possibility that there's some version of the program which runs identically somehow, but our human minds can't comprehend how to put it together, in that way. Um, I think especially if this, I think this is just a gut feeling, but especially if you take a snapshot of a game, right? If you're talking about, listen, I just want you to generate a version of this game. It doesn't need to be patchable. I don't need to be able to update it in any normal way. I don't need it to do anything other than do exactly everything that the game currently does in every edge case and every possibility. Give me, and then like what you imagine here is you imagine, I don't know, maybe it is beyond the human mind, but you imagine some guy who's put into a stasis zone and he's given a million years to work on it, right? What does he come out with in the end? It's probably not exactly like what we have today. That's not to say games are unoptimized, as it's just the word does mean optimal. You know what I mean? So it's worth bearing in mind that most or all games in existence are not actually there. And that probably becomes more true if game hardware is not, if the hardware that games are running on is not tailored towards running games in every way that they can be run. So yeah, but yeah, I'm glad to see some agreement about that. I think every human invention is overkill. You know, I don't know why this popped to mind, but the first thing that popped to mind is just a pair of scissors. A pair of scissors seems pretty well optimized to me for the job that it's doing. Right, the job is to allow a human to put their hands in and then slice a piece of paper in a pretty reasonable way. So that seems fine. It's hard to imagine how much more optimized that could get. I suppose you could say that there's maybe more advanced metals or metallurgy or whatever, and maybe you can get sharper scissors and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. So I won't linger on that. I know this is a boring question, but given how you said you're not going to do an MGS5 review, can we hear some unfiltered thoughts? I've been curious for a decade now. I don't know. It's been so long since I played it that I don't really feel like. I feel like if I said something now, it wouldn't be well informed. You know? Yeah, I did play. I played it to completion. I don't think I didn't do 100%, but it wouldn't be well informed. I have mixed feelings on it. I'll give you the one thing that stuck with me from it. I'll give you that. Um, I don't know where or when this would come up again, but it's the one thing that my mind goes back to with that game, which was, this is kind of a spoiler. It's a gameplay spoiler, but it's something that you don't see right away in the game. Well, my favorite feature from the game that comes back to me time and again in my head is the way that the enemy escalates depending on what, I think it's depending on what you do to them, but I could be wrong about that because I haven't tested it. I just did one casual playthrough and I didn't go back to it. But the way the enemy seems to escalate, so basically if you do a bunch of headshots, then the enemies will start wearing helmets. And I think that that's very clever. And I think that it's basically the kind of thing that open world games would benefit from more. I do have mixed opinions about it in a sense, right? I think there are some game developers who would maybe go about this in a very stupid way. But one of the reasons that I like the newer Zelda games is I just feel like they do a very grounded, normal thing a lot of the time. Like a lot of the time, they just follow through on ideas in a way that makes sense to me, right? So to contrast this with Breath of the Wild, for example, the Hinox enemies in that game, when you shoot them, they will block their eye. After you've shot them in the eye once, they'll block their eye, right? But it would not make sense for that game to adopt the exact same approach as Metal Gear Solid 5 because in Metal Gear Solid 5, there's this is all about narrative contrivance, right? There's a narrative contrivance about around it where maybe the people running the bases notice that there's somebody moving around and these dudes are getting shot in the head, so they issue them with helmets as a result. Whereas a Hinox on one side of the map has no reason to understand what a Hinox on the other side of the map, right? So I'm actually saying that both games did it correctly, but I just think that, or did it in a good way, but I just think that um, the contrivance in MGS5 was better and allowed for them to do more extreme versions of this where the AI didn't have to wait for you to do something in each new encampment. They could respond to you as the game went on. And I just think that open world games in general could benefit from that in some way. It's kind of like, to some extent, good games are kind of like a conversation, with between you and the designer. And um yeah, I suppose this is a little bit self-congratulatory, but when people were talking about logic bombs in the reviews and stuff like that, on the Steam reviews and stuff, that was one of my favorite things to see people say about the game, was that it felt like, use whatever kind of euphemism you want, right? But a conversation or something like that, or a metaphor or whatever. It felt like conversation. I think a lot of good games, maybe most good games, feel that way, where you're engaging in something, right? If you're playing, whether it's Ghosts and Goblins or whatever, you're engaging with something, and then you say, "Oh, I'm getting used to this," and then the designer says, but, right? But I have this extra trick up my sleeve that you didn't know about just yet, and now we're going to elaborate on this, and we're going to have the game grow from this point, right? And that's probably my favorite thing about MGS5, was that it's one of the open world games that did that best in my mind. And even then, that aspect of it was not very strong. I don't want to oversell it, but I can't say I actually remember this moment, but I'm sure it must have brought me a moment of joy when I was headshotting everybody and then walked into a new camp and headshot someone and he had a helmet, right? But I think similar things happen as well if you use decoys or you use cardboard boxes or whatever. They start to understand and respond to you in a way that causes the game to grow. And it doesn't just grow by, now they do twice as much damage, or now there's twice as many of them. It doesn't just grow as in that way. It grows in a more elaborate, more sophisticated, more enjoyable way. And so I don't know what else I have to say about that game, honestly, which is part of why I haven't reviewed it. But that is one thing that stuck with me from it. I hope that's a fair point. I have my chat still scrolled up, so I have no idea if people agree with that or not. I don't have the motion blur turned off now in this game. It's called Trails in the option menu. No, I've never really played San Andreas. I played 3 and Vice City back in the day, and maybe I just kind of had my fill. I think the San Andreas, I think Vice City resonated with me so much that San Andreas kind of felt like a letdown as a result. I like 80s music. I like the neon vibe and all that. So I was never really compelled to play San Andreas back in the day, but I'm thinking I probably should. I know a lot of people love it. So I'm thinking of doing a playthrough of that sometime soon. I'm not going to stream it though, because I've never played it through. Although, I mean, I played it back in the day a bit, here and there. But I never really stuck with it and maybe that's fine anyway, because most people back in the day, most people never really played the stories of these games. They got far enough to unlock the other islands, and that was it. That was my impression of what people were doing. But I played through the story of 3 and Vice City, and yeah, maybe I should do that for San Andreas as well. I never got to the I would probably enjoy the Las Vegas town at least, I'm still trying to read through the chat. I'm trying to pay more attention to the chat this time since we're not playing the game. I wonder what maximum efficiency proofs. That's a good term right there. That sounds like a real term that you're pulling from somewhere, but that's probably the term I should have been using. I wonder what maximum efficiency proofs would look like for games, video games, where there might be trade-offs between making a game run better with one string of inputs versus another. That is a very good point in that games are interactive. So that's one difficulty there is with them compared to the demo scene, which is typically not interactive. I think there may be some exceptions there. There was actually a demo scene video released. Some of you will remember this. Somebody in the chat will snipe me by calling out the name of it before I finish this very long-winded sentence where I give you time to name it. But there was one released on the PS3 called Linger in Shadows. It was a PS3 demo scene video. And you could fast forward and rewind it, but I don't know if it actually had any real interactivity, right? If you think about that, that's still a linear game. It's just linear, kind of bi-directionally linear. So it maybe not interactive. So in a sense, games kind of are interactive demo scene, right? You know? But yeah. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that other than it's a good point. The inputs definitely they cause the space of things that the game needs to handle to explode in a way, which does seem well, all software is like that to some extent. Software is like that to an extent that most people really do take for granted, actually. You know, part of being a good software developer is just understanding how many ways a user has to fuck themselves over and protecting them from that. Basically, a lot of what you do in software development is just, or at least in basic kind of application development or whatever, there's more energy put into just protecting the user and dealing with all of the potential stuff that a user is going to do than people think. People take it all for granted, you know. And then that's to say nothing of trying to protect against malicious users and all that kind of stuff as well. So, but yeah, games are another level up from that. I think it's fair to say, given that a lot of applications are stuff like drop downs and text boxes and tick boxes and all that kind of stuff. Although, of course, there's much more complicated ones as well, like video editing software and all that kind of thing as well. In games, it's a mechanical. I'm reading another comment. In games, it's a mechanical frustration for me with with a lack of advancement. Only a handful of games surpass the capabilities of the 7th gen of consoles on that front, which is a shame. Yeah, I agree. This user is called The Wonderful 101. And I think The Wonderful 101 is an example of a game which benefited from technological advancement in that it's very hard to imagine it running on the PS2, at least in any kind of truly recognizable way. You do have a game like Pikmin. So Pikmin's on the GameCube. The GameCube was a fair bit more advanced than the PS2, from what I understand. But it's my understanding that the GameCube and the Xbox are basically the earliest of what we would consider modern consoles, and that actually the PS2 falls a little bit outside of that category. But because it doesn't support modern sort of shader stuff. But anyway, even the GameCube though, yeah, you get Pikmin. Do you get the Wonderful 101 on the GameCube? I don't know. I don't know. When you consider that you have to have 100 things moving around just like Pikmin, but then also a load of other stuff happening as well, it's a bit of a stretch. But you know, there's probably some graphically toned down version of it that you could get going. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I liked about that game was that it did actually take advantage of hardware advancements. There's just not a lot of that happening. I suppose that's a question to put to the chat. If you want to give me a name of some games that you think are actually taking advantage of modern hardware in ways that are useful, that are, I don't know how to put it, that actually have mechanical ramifications rather than just gameplay ramifications, you know? Graphic ramifications, I mean, rather than just graphical ramifications, I should have said. Sorry. One of these days I'll do a stream when my brain is awake properly. Okay, anyway. Just trying to catch up on the chat a little bit. How do you feel about roguelikes? Do I have much to say on that? I don't know. In some sense, I see them as the successor to arcade games because they're designed for replayability, and they do focus more on having kind of base. Well, I'm talking about roguelites, I suppose you might say. I don't know how you apply the term, you know. Some people say that anything that doesn't have a progression system is a roguelite or a roguelike, whereas anything that does is a roguelite, and it doesn't matter whether it's an action game or blah blah blah. But most of the ones I play would be more action orientated, stuff like Binding of Isaac or Hades or Returnal or whatever. Yeah, I have mixed feelings on it. You know, I like Returnal a lot. On the one hand, you know, you can't help but look at a game like The Binding of Isaac. The Binding of Isaac, in this action space at least, still seems to be the best example of one which uses the randomization to provide you with a different experience each time, right? To really stretch the extremes of what the system can do. And so sometimes you're playing it and you're steamrolling, and sometimes you're playing it and your strategy needs to vary depending on, like, maybe you get a ton of bombs or you don't, or da, 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 da. When you compare it to a game like Hades, for example, I don't think that aspect is very strong in Hades. I haven't played Hades 2, so I don't know if it's better in that game, but I don't think that aspect is particularly strong. And this is where I have slightly mixed feelings on Returnal, because I really enjoy the game, but that randomization aspect doesn't add a huge amount to it. On the other hand, if you see it as a successor to arcade games and stuff, I think when people look at arcade games were made with scores and stuff, and some arcade games are fun to play for score, but some of them aren't. You know, I was playing a lot of Ghouls and Ghosts on stream, for example. Ghouls and Ghosts not really fun to play for score. If you were to play for score, it's totally broken. It doesn't really make any sense. So the reason you play Ghouls and Ghosts is to do a run through of it and just see if you can get to the end. See if you can get the one credit clear. And that's where the fun of the game is. And there's randomization in it partly to make that experience fun each time, right? So if you look at Returnal the same way, you can actually see a through line. You can kind of even ignore, of course, Returnal has conventions that do seem to pull from roguelite and roguelite inspiration specifically, right? Especially in the Tower of Sisyphus mode, although I can't remember all the specifics on that. I need to play that game some more because I really enjoy it, but anyway, I have enough to be doing. You can kind of see it through. You could ignore the whole roguelite genre and kind of see a through line there from games like Ghouls and Ghosts, which were a minority with the randomization, right? Shmups tended to not have as much memorization in them. But you can kind of see a through line there to a game like Returnal, where the goal is just to see whether you can get to the end. It's not about how high you can score or any of that stuff. And so it's just like, a more charitable way to view it is just, if you feel like replaying this game, go for it, because it's going to be a little bit different next time, right? In that sense, the randomization really helps, doesn't it? So it's not going to provide you with a totally different experience every time you play, but that randomization will help a lot. So I think I'm still unsure of how to analyze them in a deeper way. Obviously, you take each game on its own merits, right? And I think part of the reason why I would judge The Binding of Isaac differently is because it does go in a more extreme direction. That's a nice scene there with the rain, I think. It does go in a more extreme direction with the kinds of things that you can pick up and the impact that can have on your run. But also, to look at it more negatively, it's not really that fun when you start out, right? Without all of that roguelite enhancement The Binding of Isaac is not that enjoyable. It's okay, you know, it's not the worst game, but personally, maybe some people disagree, but personally, I think when you first start a run, it's just not that enjoyable to move Isaac around and shoot the tiers and stuff. It's not intrinsically fun to a high degree, right? In that way. Um, and it's a spectrum. There's that. What's that game called? It was called Monolith when I played it, but they renamed it, which is a bit strange. Star of Providence, I think they renamed it to. It's kind of like the Binding of Isaac, but it's more immediately enjoyable. And then, of course, the trade-off is that it doesn't have nearly as much randomization. So it's kind of like a spectrum there. So I think you have to take each game on its own merits, and I think I would like if Returnal had more randomization to it. This is one thing that Remnant has over it, is that just that there's more biomes, and that helps, you know. There's a little the randomization is a bit more impactful in it. Now I think it's dragged down by also being more bloated with a bunch of story crap that didn't need to be there, and a town full of NPCs and stuff that I didn't care about. And I'm kind of worried that Saros is going to have similar problems where it's just going to be too bloated, and um, I suspect I'm not going to enjoy the story as much in that one, and there may be more story. I feel like Returnal really struck a nice balance between like just get into the game and start playing, but also having some narrative depth to it. You know, Remnant is not the same way, but Remnant has um, more variety to it, right? And some of the environments are really nice as a result of that. And the bosses were more varied as well. And so depending on which bosses you get, because they're more varied than they are in Returnal, then and also in Returnal you're going through the same bosses every time as well, which is not true in Remnant, right? So that's another thing. The randomization is better in that game, and I think Returnal would benefit from some of that. But I don't want to throw it under the bus for not having more randomization, because it's just an enjoyable game to replay anyway, just to go through and get the one credit clear or whatever, you know. Anyway, let me scroll. Oh, I missed so much stuff. I had the chat put up and I've missed so much stuff. I can't get through all this, fellas. No, I haven't gotten back to New Vegas. It'll be a good while for that. I have too much other stuff that I need to play at the moment. Power of the Cube. This is how far back I am in the chat. Yeah, I would like to update Teo form. Yeah, I don't know. It's if I do it again, I'll definitely make it easier for other people to pick up the slack and fix it if I'm not there to do it, because I should have done that last time and I didn't. But yeah, like all that stuff has gone out of my head, so I would have to remember how to use the tools and inspect these things and figure out what it was I was looking at last time. It's pretty hard to. I do have some notes somewhere to help me, but it's pretty hard to get back into the swing of things. It would take at least a full day of work to just to get comfortable with it again and start fixing it, and then who knows? It's up in the air how long. Um, yeah. Skipping over, I don't think anybody had any good suggestions for which games are technically impressive. Somebody mentioned Order of the Sinking Star, which I'm sure the game will run well and all that. I'm looking forward to it. One of my most anticipated games at the minute, I would say. But I think it remains to be seen whether it will actually do anything. Like the fact that you can zoom out and see the whole map may be relevant, but also games have kind of done things like that for a while with with non-gameplay maps, and maybe the game could have got away with that. So I wouldn't say, based on what I've seen of it so far, it doesn't look like maybe the best example of what I was talking about, but I'm sure it'll be a good game. It kind of makes me sad that roguelikes are the continuation of arcade games, because it feels like randomization is replacing good encounter design and satisfying gameplay. Returnal has those. I agree completely. I agree with you completely. Yeah, and I mean, it's no secret now that I absolutely love, particularly Ghouls and Ghosts and Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection. I need to play some more Super, and I need to play Ultimate as well. So I'm still up in the air on those. But yeah, those two games in particular, they have randomization in them already, but they also have encounter design, which is phenomenal. And I think maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like, given the fact that you just don't see other developers do this very much, and given how engaging and fun it feels to play, um, it's just maybe difficult to set that up in some way, right? It's difficult to strike that balance between randomization and encounter design, like having a specific encounter goal in mind, like the part in Resurrection where you have all those firefoxes bouncing all over the screen, and you have this idea you want to convey, and it's going to be random, but how do you balance it and make sure that it's fair, and da 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 da. That's, for me, something I'm more interested in than going crazy on the randomization. But that is a certain amount of randomization, you know. Let's drive around a little bit there. I think we've spent a full in-game day there, so um, I'm not sure where to go. Well, this is kind of nice by itself here. I'll just park here again. There, it's kind of nice. Maybe I'll go to the docks next or something. Change it up a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote down some things to discuss, and I only talked about one of them so far. But I'm trying to keep up with the chat because I don't. Let me do that. Your Star Successor stream convinced me to check out the first Sin and Punishment and its Peak. Thanks for recommending Peak. You're welcome. You're welcome. Say Peak less, though. Ever played any of the Sega games? What are you talking about? Of course I played Sega games. How many Mega Drive streams are we at now at this point? However, in games it seems counterintuitive since some systems need friction, i.e. fighting game inputs to achieve balance. That must have been the follow-on from something, I'm not sure. But yeah. Thought Viewfinder had impressive tech. Yeah. I didn't really enjoy it as a puzzle game. I do think the concept was cool. When is the earliest you could have feasibly done that idea is basically what I'm asking for each game. I suppose the Xbox and the GameCube would have been a stretch for that, but I do think I could see that happening on the Xbox 360 or something, you know? It's interesting that so far Nintendo has not used DLSS at all on the Switch 2 for first-party titles. Long may it continue. Is that actually true? First of all, I don't know. I don't know. But long may it continue. I don't want it, man. I'm like, it's something that I dread. I don't want the next Zelda game to come out and be a blurry fucking mess or something, or be full of fake frames or fake pixels or whatever. That would just be sad to me, you know? I have a lot of conflicting feelings on things, fellas. That's just the way I am. I suppose I'm trying new things, right? So I'm gonna put up a goal. And we're gonna call this the Switch 2 goal. But you can't actually put an amount. What's the point then? If you can't put an amount, what's the point? I don't know. You have to pick a number of super chats rather than an actual sort of monetary value. So I'd kind of like to put up a Switch 2 goal. But the conflicting feeling on that is like my patrons are paying for living expenses, which are less glamorous but are more important. So I should just make sure to thank them more often, I suppose. But thank you to all my patrons. So people who do super chats are getting shout outs, but the patrons get shout outs as well. If you're a patron, I'm getting more of your money. So proportionally, because I get a better cut on the Patreon. You can put a limit on the, I don't know what the things are called. You can put a limit on the, so I suppose you could work out how much money you wanted to generate with the goal. I don't know. They've made that more awkward than it needs to be, I think. I suppose it's, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway. I'll leave it. But yeah, I'm thinking of buying a Switch 2 soon. Because I don't imagine the price going down at this point, you know? Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Tectonic. I know. I know. I was hoping to hold off a bit longer. I was actually kind of enjoying holding off, is the thing. Because there's a few games on it now that I'd like to play. And I was kind of enjoying, once I missed the launch window, I was kind of enjoying just letting some games build up, you know? I'm picturing getting one and then just binging on a bunch of different games. I suppose I can do that already now if I get one now, but what would I like to play? I'd like to play Mario Kart World. Like I said, I'm one of the few people that hasn't played Mario Kart 8, so I'm overdue for some Mario Kart. Mario Kart, Donkey Kong, Kirby. Is there another game? Oh yeah, Metroid Prime 4. I think that's it for me for now. Kessler says, I don't think it will go up in price at all. I don't know what makes you think that, man. I think I'm pretty solidly in the camp that it is not going down in price anytime soon. So, you know, I was hoping to hold out for a revision because what happened before with the Switch 1 was there was a die shrink at some point, which meant that you got better battery life and stuff. But even now, that kind of stuff is happening less frequently because that technology is just not improving the way it used to. So maybe that's a pipe dream as well, you know? But I don't see the price going down. Because even if all of the factors that are causing prices to go up go away tomorrow, and there's a multitude of them, but even if they all go away tomorrow, they're going to be hesitant to put the price down because who knows? It's volatile. So I just don't. World is pretty bad, to be honest. Kirby Air Riders is the only one I would look forward to playing to if I had a Switch 2. Yeah, that's another thing I have written down is those rumors. Will we get into them? The rumors? I kind of feel like I should put a spoiler warning here. So basically, there's some rumors that came out about what's coming for the Switch 2. And apparently the guy who said them had a good track record. So, well, first of all, what I would say is I don't have a Switch 2, right? But I actually like Nintendo's strategy for the Switch 2, and I don't know how many people have even copped on to what it is, even though it's a good strategy for what the console is, right? So I'll talk about that first of all. Um, Now, I really like what they've done with the Switch 2 so far in terms of the games and stuff. Uh, Here's what I think happened right now. Like I said, I'm disappointed that the Switch 2 isn't more, let's say, gimmicky, right? I'm kind of sad that it won't allow you to use the handheld as a second screen, which would make DS Virtual Console or whatever so much easier and better, and allow for lots of other games and stuff. But uh, but whatever, it is what it is, right? But I think they could have done that without confusing people and without causing problems. Just left it as an option for developers to embrace or not, you know. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Um, so yeah, their strategy seems to be they knew somewhere along the way they knew that they were launching a Switch 2, which was more basically just a follow up to the Switch 1, and is a fairly safe console and is going to be backwards compatible. So, given the fact that the console is safe, they've taken a bit more risk with their games, which I think is good. It does not make a huge amount of sense to put Sakurai on Air Riders, you know, compared to having him work on another Smash or even maybe something else instead. Uh, so the fact that they got him to do that is cool. Pushing Donkey Kong with his own game instead of Mario is cool. I haven't played Bonanza. I don't know whether or not it's actually a good game or not, but I think it looks appealing to me. It looks like it has a nice, slightly weird tone to it as well, in terms of its atmosphere, and also just the fact that it's not Mario and they're trying to do something a little bit different with it. Um, they're not relying on the Mario brand, right? First of all, it's more, it's a little bit more fresh for me as a player. Um, and it's also just a smart business strategy as well for Nintendo, because if they can use this opportunity right now to push other franchises to the fore, then that makes them more safe in the long run as well. Because if you have people just as excited for Donkey Kong games as they are for Mario games, now you have even more to give people and more leeway and more stuff to do in the future. So I think they're taking this opportunity um, to branch out a little bit more in terms of software as well, which is good. Uh, what was I going to say? Mario Kart World is arguably an example of that because it is a big shift for the Mario series. Now, maybe it's a safe shift. Again, I haven't played it. So maybe it's a shift in a safe direction that's kind of disappointing or something, or maybe not what they should have done. The open world approach, you know. But they were clearly taking somewhat of a gamble on it, considering that it's such a huge seller for them. The safer thing to do would have been to just carry on in the typical way, right? But part of the reason that they probably feel compelled to do that is because the Switch is backwards compatible. This is something that people overlook, but that Nintendo is not overlooking. And their actions are proving that, because it's a reason for them to make the Mario Kart World different from Mario Kart 8, right? And this is a reason why I believe, I don't know, I'm not willing to bet my life savings on this, let's say, but I would bet good money that the next mainline Zelda game is not going to, visually it may resemble the recent games, but it's something about it is going to be drastically different from the recent games. Reason being, those games are already on the Switch. So Nintendo has no incentive to make another one and try to sell you that when they're competing with themselves, right? They want their games to be evergreen. They have that, right? They have Mario Odyssey. If you bought a Switch 2 and you never had a Switch, you can play Mario Odyssey for the first time, and it's a brand new game to you, you know? So I think they're branching out more in terms of software, and this is why it makes sense to me, if the rumors are true, a bit of a spoiler here for Nintendo's upcoming games. This is why it makes sense to me that now would be a good time for a Star Fox game, if that's true. Because Star Fox is not a very safe series, right? But now they have the opportunity to push it more to the fore, and they have an opportunity to push it more to the fore. And make a new franchise out of it. I mean, not new, obviously, right? But to, I think Star Fox is a good example of this because I was talking about it when I was playing Sin and Punishment last time. They have 3 rail shooter properties, right? Sin and Punishment, Kid Icarus, and Star Fox. And Star Fox is obviously the one with the most franchise potential. I think a lot of people feel this way. This is one of the things that makes Star Fox so curious and such kind of an anomaly in Nintendo's catalog is that just that when you look at Star Fox, you feel like, yeah, this has potential to be a mainline, you know, maybe not tent pole, but like a big Nintendo franchise, the kind of thing that sells a lot and people are and they're pushing it and they're making a lot of money on it, right? It feels like Star Fox is one of those games that could be that. But it's just never quite gotten there, you know. And maybe this thing with again, I'm gonna, you know, yeah, I suppose I won't talk about that. I'm just talking about the rumors. But you know, they have an opportunity to push him to the fore, and uh, and maybe they'll take it. And it makes sense to me that that they'll do that. Star Fox popularity comes from Smash and Star Fox popularity comes from Smash and Furries, not from actual mainline games. Yeah, you might be right about that. I don't know. I mean, it is a little bit worrying to hear that they're going to bring back Star Fox because you know me, I would prefer for it to be an arcadey game, especially because arcadey style games are just not the majority of Nintendo's catalog, right? I think that that's an area where they're underrepresented and they could do more with it. Maybe they just need to roll in some of the roguelike elements, right? I'm not totally against that. Or some more, let's not phrase it that way, just more randomization, right? I am absolutely, if you know me, you know I'm absolutely not saying Star Fox bumps into a giant floating card and then picks one up that and it says here's 3, pick one, right? I'm not asking for that, but more randomization of some kind, maybe something that makes it very replayable, right? I think this is one way Nintendo failed. I think with the side order DLC for Splatoon, which is not to say that it was bad, but just it fell into just. Oh, thank you, Inside Outski. Thank you, appreciate it. That's going in the Switch 2 fund. If anybody wants to throw some more dollary dues in the Switch 2 fund, you're welcome. But yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, I'm not saying give me here's 3, pick one, but some kind of randomization would be good. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. The super chats are ruining the stream. I'm turning them off. No, I did lose my train of thought, but I don't think it was that important. I don't think that was that important. Thank you, Shybug. Is the Switch 2 a stupid thing? It's going in the Switch 2 fund. Oh, please buy something stupid with this. You gave me $10, so congratulations. Your $10 is go has your $10 has resulted in a purchase of Nintendo Switch Welcome Tour. When I get my Switch 2, I'll get my Welcome Tour. You know, I honestly would be tempted to buy that game. I may even do that because just because if I make more videos, it's the kind of thing that could be good video fodder. There could be good footage in there. You know what I mean? So I actually would be tempted to buy that game. But as an expense. You know what I mean? Why did they not give that away for free? Why did they not give that away for free? Thank you as well, Hungry Waffle. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. Wait, this is a lot of copies of Welcome Tour. I'm going to have to make at least 3 or 4 accounts now. Yeah, somebody said Tears of the Kingdom was poorly received, so Nintendo's not going to do that again. And I don't know what world you're living in, man, but it was not poorly received. If you think that, you're in some kind of algorithmic echo chamber. Certainly, um, I can understand it being a divisive game, and I don't think it's perfect by any means. I have feelings on it that maybe I'll get into at a certain point later in time. But don't throw stuff like that out there, but like saying it was poorly received. It wasn't. It wasn't. That's like me going, man, Elden Ring was poorly received. It was poorly. No, man, it wasn't poorly received. Okay, there's some people that don't feel as positively about it as other people, but don't delude yourself into thinking you're in the majority. What we do here, it would be nice to get a nice angle, but you can't actually move the camera. I'll park here and I'll just see what happens. I think maybe if one of the cops bumps into the car, I'm going to get a star though. I'll park it here on the path like an asshole. Thank you, Overtoted. We've got a lot of copies of Welcome Tour now. I don't know why you're all giving Nintendo so much money here, but Matthew, in the last stream, I recommended you FMDM because you wanted VM recommendations. I apologize. I haven't read it. Full Metal, whatever. Thank you, Freeze. Appreciate it. Yeah, I haven't read it, but I am kind of interested in it. I think actually what I that was another thing that I wrote down on my list. I want to get back to that Nintendo stuff. There's another thing I wrote down on my list is, gentlemen, I am here to report. I'm here to report some startling news, gentlemen. Brace yourselves. I'm shuffling the papers on my desk in disbelief. So get ready for this. The weeaboos are actually correct about the house in Fata Morgana. They called it correct. It is actually a good story and worth playing. So yeah, I finished the house in Fata Morgana. I would appreciate if nobody spoiled it in the chat, because there's people in the chat who probably have not played it, and it's good. It is good. I mean, I've only just finished one playthrough of it, so you know me. If I review a game, I do it twice. And somebody asked, what is that? So I'll say the name one last time. The House in Fata Morgana. It's a visual novel. And yeah, I thought it was very good. Thought it was very good. This is just my gut impression, right? This would not classify as a review, but I'll give it to you since I'm giving it to you. Since I'm giving it to you. The the dialogue was not exactly to my taste in some parts. It's a little bit too modern in some ways. The obviously the dialogue was intended to be easy to read, and it's actually not. It's not entirely normalized. I don't know if that's the word that I want to say, use. It's not entirely modernized. It's not entirely modernized, right? The characters do use some old turns of phrase or some old words and old things sometimes, but it was intended to be a bit easier to read. Like they weren't trying to be authentic to the time periods that are depicted in the game, and that's okay. But I do think that they went a little bit far with how modern they would speak sometimes in it, and Yeah, that could be a translation thing. It could be. Yeah. Um, that's the first criticism of the game that comes to mind for me. Um, Certainly there are some other things. There was parts of it that I thought were stronger or weaker, but I have to say, having gone through, like, when I was playing it on the prior stream, I was in the middle of playing it, and I thought it was good, and I was enjoying it, but I wasn't loving it. But having finished it, I do feel like it's the kind of thing that will stick with me, you know. Um, and that's just one of those games that I get the impression of it's a bit special in that way, you know. So I'm here to report that the Weeaboos have made a correct call on the house in Fata Morgana. So if you're like me and you're Weeaboo hesitant, if you're Weeaboo skeptic, the house in Fata Morgana is actually okay. So yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, as somebody who, I've tried to enhance my skill as a writer. Um, And on the rare occasion that I read books, I am looking for something which has very polished, kind of masterful use of the English language is something that I appreciate, you know? So the game can't really offer that to you, but as far as translations and stuff go, it's definitely above most, even if it slips up sometimes and isn't quite where it could be. There's there's some actual moments of prose in it, you know, for a translated game, for a translated anime style game, there are some moments where there's actual prose in it. Um, so yeah, I appreciated it. I thought it had a very nice atmosphere, very interesting atmosphere. I think it stuck the landing, and I suppose I don't want to get into spoilers, but I felt like how do I want to say this without spoiling anything? It felt like a reasonably mature story, you know. I think that I'll just say what's coming to mind. No, I'm only bringing it up for the first time here, so we'll give people a chance to act on that sort of mini recommendation if they want to. Right now, I don't know if I would be comfortable doing a recommendation video for it. VNs are not one of my more well-traveled genres, but if you count the ones that have gameplay, then I think I do actually have a fair amount of experience with them. Um, but I do hope to read some more. I suppose what I'm looking at, so House and Fata Morgana is not the most philosophical thing going, but I think that's one of the aspects I appreciated about it is that there was a philosophical kind of edge to it, and I think that's one of the reasons why people recommended me Full Metal Demon, what's it called? Full Metal Demon Muramasa, which I haven't read. It's unfortunately not on Steam, which honestly maybe I shouldn't say this, but it honestly makes me a little less inclined to buy it because I have the Steam Deck and it's just easy to buy things on the Steam. Now, what do you want me to say? I like the stuff that GOG does, and yeah. But maybe I'll head over to GOG and buy it there. I do have a GOG account. And then, yeah. So I suppose what I was looking for in um, visual novels and stuff, when I was asking for recommendations last time, I would like to read some that are a bit more philosophical. I would say The House in Fata Morgana sort of qualifies as something with a philosophical. It's not philosophically focused, but it's got that kind of a bit of that edge to it, which is nice. But it's more so a different type of story, I would say. I won't even say what it is, so as not to spoil. Yeah, if somebody says Muramasa, I just think of the Vanillaware game, so that's why I wouldn't call it that. Probably other games called Muramasa as well. Who knows how many of them there are? Gog, Ghosts of Goblin. Yeah, man, I'm surprisingly tired. I thought I was okay, but I'm really actually quite tired right now. um, I feel like I had more to say about Nintendo's strategy. But yeah, there was another rumor about what they're going to make. So I'm getting back into these rumors again if you want to close your ears. Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to say, which is this has gone under the radar. I did not make. Actually, I'm curious. Uh, well, don't cause yourself any trouble because you may be. I don't know what the story was. You might be under an NDA or whatever. So I'm not asking anybody to get themselves into trouble. But did anybody in the chat get into the Nintendo Switch online playtest? I didn't even apply for it. Did anybody get into it? You can say what you like about it there if you want to, but it's on your head if it causes you any problems. Um, I don't think it would, but that's not legal advice. Uh, but that's another game they have in the works. It seems like that's still in the works, and that's another kind of risk that they're taking, you know? So they've got that, presumably Star Fox, um, and Bonanza, I would say Bonanza's not a huge risk, but it's a little bit of a risk. Mario Kart again, not a huge risk, but a little bit of a risk. I would like to see more new IP out of them, and I don't know. Um, it would be nice to see Sakurai maybe go back to Kid Icarus or something rather than going to Smash. Again, this is people said I was crazy last time, and maybe it is crazy, but the console is backwards compatible. So if they want to do a push for Smash Bros, they don't have to make a whole new game. They could just do a little bit of DLC and then Sakurai goes back to something else. And I don't want to put too much pressure on the expectations on them. But another thing I was thinking, I don't know if I said this on stream, but I was thinking this was Sakurai seems to be extremely productive, right? Man, I aspire to that level of productivity, right? Um, so I was wondering, again, I haven't played Air Riders, but I was thinking maybe that's not the only thing he's been working on. Because if you compare it to something the scale of Smash Bros, it's probably a bit smaller, and maybe he had bandwidth to be spinning up some other game in the meantime. So maybe he's got another game that's not as far away as people might think, you know? I'd say, especially considering that it seems like he likes being productive, maybe one of the reasons he wouldn't want to make another Smash Bros is he just wants to crank out more games, you know? Um, so I could see him kind of being in the early stages of a Kid Icarus Uprising remaster or something like that, and that being on like maybe only a year or two away, or even less, maybe in their ideal circumstances. Oh, another slight risk, not really much of a risk, but another slight thing Nintendo's doing out of the ordinary is the Dusk Bloods as well, which I didn't mention. So I think they've taken this moment to do some things with their properties. I wish that they would go even more extreme with it. And I think one way that they should feel comfortable doing that is just to be more comfortable, maybe not outright advertising, but somehow promoting their Switch back catalog to people who never had a Switch One. Um, but also, I think um, this is another reason why getting into the next rumor now. This is another reason why, unfortunately, I think the Ocarina of Time remake also makes some amount of sense. Because I'll tell you what, right? Switch 2, imagine you're in the process of you're going to launch the Switch 2 in a couple of years and you have time to plan around it. And you say, right, we're going to do this and then we're going to take a risk with the IPs because we think that this console is going to sell well based on the Switch branding. We think we don't have to do as much heavy lifting with our IPs as usual. So we can skip the big Zelda. You know, we don't need to have a big Zelda or a big Mario there. We can do some other interesting things and maybe that'll work out, right? But in case it doesn't work out, we do need something up our sleeves, right? If we're a year or two into this thing and it's not kicking off, we need something up our sleeves that's going to get everybody back on board. And I could see an Ocarina of Time remake being one of the things that's pitched as that rebound option, you know? Personally, what I would like is I would like if the leakers are mistaken on this one. If, for those who don't know, A Link Between Worlds started out as a remake of A Link to the Past, and eventually they just spun it into its own thing, and I think that was a savvy move. Say what you want. I think A Link Between Worlds is one of the better Zelda games. I think it's a very good game, and I think we would be worse off if we just had a Link to the Past remake instead of that game. Much worse off. It's a very very good game, and I would hope that the same thing would happen if they tried to make an Ocarina of Time remake. What they should be doing is they should be saying, you know what, people still like Ocarina of Time. We have this thing that's shaping up like Ocarina of Time, but let's just do something new with it. Like the difference between doing a remake, once you get to a certain scale, right? Especially if imagine if this is being made in the house as well by proper Nintendo developers, right? People who know what they're doing. If it's being made by people like that, the difference between doing full blown Ocarina of Time remake with like modern graphics and all this, the difference between doing that and an Ocarina of Time style game with its own twist and its own spin is not that big in the grand scheme of things, right? And it gives you a whole new game to sell to people. Um, I just don't want it to be true personally, so that's one reason why I'm coming up with these ideas. But I would love if people are mistaken about this, and I honestly don't care if they don't come out with anything at all for Zelda for the next year or two, at least a couple of years. Throw a remaster out or something, you know, the Wind Waker or Twilight Princess or some other little thing. Um, Throw out Four Swords Adventures with online multiplayer, you know? That's a quick, simple thing they could do that would still have novelty. The graphics on that don't need to be touched, basically. Give me that as my Zelda 40th anniversary. You know, the Legend of Zelda 40 Swords Adventures for the Zelda 40th anniversary. Something like that, right? Um, Give me something like that. Don't give me an Ocarina of Time remake. Because first of all, the game is still good, right? You can argue about whether or not it's overrated or not. I think it's still a good game though. And you know, I haven't played through it fully in a long time, so I'm not going to make a judgment call on it again right now. But it's still at the very least a good game that is worth playing. And it has some of that demo scene beauty and stuff that we were talking about. Uh, we were talking about games running on old hardware and all that, and Ocarina of Time has that. So, oh my god, I need to get to bed soon, I think. Um, so just sell that to people, you know? Uh, Let people play that again. Um, yeah, I just don't want it to be true. I would rather see something small or see them go in a different direction with that, but I can unfortunately see some logic in making it so that you have a safer bet up your sleeve for later, so that if the Switch 2 had somehow bombed, they could pull it back from the brink, you know? But maybe if they were really smart and really flexible, what they could have done is, you know, let's build up this technology for an Ocarina of Time thing, and then if the Switch 2 bombs, it's a remake. If not, we spin it off into its own game, right? That would be the 4D chess move, but I don't know if that's happening or not. I just want people. I want them to be wrong about that, and I'd like for the Zelda team to get plenty of time. At the very least, I don't want them to, because it's the 40th anniversary now. I don't want them to feel obligated to pull some trailer out of their hat in order to uh, in order to give people a glimpse at the next game or something, you know. I appreciate the super chats, fellas. Hungry Waffle. The next 3D Zelda game won't come out until after Matt's Tears of the Kingdom video comes out, so in like 5+ years. Yeah. Let's drive around a little bit more. Let's go. Is this the docks down here? We'll take a little vista over here. I appreciate the super chat, Alf, but I don't mean to be disrespectful, and you're free. I don't know if there's a way to request refunds on these things or something, but it's not really a question. You asked about what are my favorite games. I talked about this a little bit in the Patreon Q&A, and it's kind of something that I don't really like to talk about. So that's the second question you've asked that I don't really like to talk about. Oh, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I don't want to allow the super chats to lead me into things that I don't want to talk about either. So if there's some kind of, I don't know how it works on your end, if there's some kind of refund thing you can request on your end, I'd be happy to do that. But since I'm not answering your question though, there's games that are meaningful to me, but I do tend to avoid talking about outright favorites because it is something that changes over time. And I don't know. I think people take it as too much of a declaration of I don't know. People put too much weight on it or something, I don't know how else to describe it. I think a lot of you know what I mean by that, though, right? It's like let's say I give you a list of my top 10 games, and then you look at the list and you don't really relate to it all that much, or you think that maybe some of the games are bad. It's kind of, it becomes an excuse to ignore what I'm saying. And in some sense, I can understand that because maybe your taste just doesn't align with mine, and maybe that's not useful to hear what I have to say about that. But on the other hand, uh, maybe that shouldn't matter that much, Maybe it should be more just about what I'm saying in the moment and what you can take from that. Because I presume there's people in the chat that have very different tastes from me that still get some value out of what I'm saying. But what I can say as well is, even though I'm not answering your question, um, I would like to recommend more stuff, and I'm trying to get there. Let me put it that way. Trying very hard to get there. I take it seriously though, this stuff that I'm recommending, and there's some work that is involved in that. Yeah, well, I have talked in the past, so I can say that. I have talked in the past about the Wonderful 101 being my favorite game. So I don't mind saying that. But yeah, it is true that it came out 13 years ago. I don't think anything has dethroned it though. The closest, this is another thing, probably the closest anything got is Rain World. But I don't think yeah, it didn't get there for me. I honestly don't know. Somebody's saying, I assume this is jokingly now, but uh, his top 10 is atrocious. He's trying to evade being exposed. You got me. I actually don't know what my top 10 would be. I think it's pretty easy to pin down a top, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 or something like that. But getting all the way to 10, it gets harder. It kind of gets harder around 10 or 15, and then it gets maybe easier again if I was to go for 25 or something like that. But yeah, maybe I'll do top 40 at 40 so that we can frame it as just, yeah. Um, oh yeah, another thing I wrote down was PlayStation moving away from PC, it seems like. So that was another thing that there was news about that today where apparently I don't know if this is true, but apparently they changed some of the descriptions on their developers to remove PC naming or whatever. It's been rumored that this was going to happen. But I have mixed feelings on this because it's one of those things where sometimes as a consumer, right? Let's say you're being, I think, first of all, that it doesn't need to be adversarial, right? The relationship between game developers and publishers and players and all that kind of stuff. In an ideal world, it doesn't have to have much of an adversarial component to it, right? But there is something like, that looks really nice, doesn't it? The color there. There's something like, let's put it in the most cynical, horrible way that we can, right? If I make a game, there is something like, I make the game, it's something that is designed for you to desire it, and then I withhold it from you until you give me money, and then you can indulge in that desire. Okay? That's like the most cynical possible way to view game development, right? I'm just generating something that I know that you're going to find irresistible, and then you're going to give me money for it because you can't get it any other way. Let's assume you can't get it any other way. I know that's not an airtight assumption. But it doesn't necessarily need to be all that adversarial, but there is there's some reasonable way of viewing all this where there is kind of like I have my interests and you have your interests. The consumer has their way of viewing things and the publisher has their way of viewing things and all that. And so one piece of advice I would give you as one consumer to another, from one consumer to another, is just that as a consumer, sometimes it behooves you to shut the fuck up, to not tell publishers what you're thinking all the time. This is something that people have a very hard time doing, but sometimes the best strategy for you in an adversarial relationship or whatever is just not to reveal your hand, right? Just shut the fuck up. And as Sun Tzu would say, do not interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake. Okay? This is what the PlayStation is not my enemy. But let's just say I was not exactly incentivized to go and trumpet as loudly as possible. PlayStation, this is a bad idea for you to release your games on PC. This is going to hurt you in the long run. Because as a consumer, it benefits me to have their games on the PC, right? Now, the only reason I'm really saying it now is because the only reason I'm saying it now is because Sony is pulling back from this PC thing, and it's very obvious they've realized what the mistake is, and they're now acting as a warning to Nintendo, right? So Nintendo, if they were considering this PC move, they're looking at Sony and saying, well, it didn't work for them. So they have something that they can say to their shareholders. Their shareholders will say to them, why are you not releasing your games on the PC? Because I'm an idiot and I don't know how to make my shares go up. So if I think you should just pump everything now, right? It wasn't a good idea in the first place. If I worked there, I would say, don't do this. This is a bad idea. It's short-term thinking. It devalues the brand. Because what happens is you release your games on the PC, people get it into their head that PlayStation games come to the PC, and it's very hard to unring that bell. It's going to be very hard for them to go back from this, right? People are not going to say, the idea was, people are going to play some of their games on the PC, and then they're going to be so tempted they're going to get a PlayStation and play there, and then we'll get them into our ecosystem, right? But instead, what's going to happen is PlayStation released a bunch of their games on PC. Now they're not coming out on the PC. PC consumer says, well, I was happy when I got them. They're not doing it anymore, but maybe they will again. They did before, so maybe they will again. In the meantime, I'll play some other things, and maybe PlayStation will come crawling back to me, So if PlayStation, I'll tell you now, if they're going back to their console, right? I'll tell you now, what they need to do now is like set a hard line in the sand and not flip flop, because like I said, it's not that they can't undo it, but it's going to take a long time for that to get into the collective unconscious of the casual consumer, right? So I think it was a mistake. I think they've realized it was a mistake. They're trying to undo the mistake, and it's just crazy that they have wasted so much time and energy chasing things that were not beneficial to them, like that. All the live service games that flopped, just crazy. Um, I don't know what they were thinking, but yeah, I think it devalued their brand a bit. I think it did, and if they're realizing that, they're right to realize that. And again, I don't think this. I see myself as I have a foot in each door, right? I have a foot in, like, as a influencer, critic, analyst, whatever you want to call me, as a game developer and as a consumer, because I play a lot of games and I like playing games. I like buying games and playing games and engaging with games in a good way and all that. So I have a foot in every door. So I see it, I'm seeing this from every angle, and I really don't want it to be this adversarial thing. And another way to view it is that it it's good for the consumer for PlayStation games to come to PC, but maybe it's bad if you actually enjoy those AAA games that Sony were releasing. Maybe it's actually bad for them to come to PC, because if it does devalue the brand, then maybe they can't make those games anymore. You know, part of the reason why the term would be a loss leader, right? Part of the reason why they're able to make those games is because they know that they can get people into their ecosystem as a result of those games and then make margin on other things that they do around the ecosystem of the PlayStation. Uh, so I those games, the term in regular sort of commerce would be a loss leader. Like maybe if you go into a supermarket, they don't make much margin on, this is something I've heard. I don't know if it's true, but if you go into a supermarket, they don't make much margin on milk, right? They make almost nothing on the milk, but that gets you in the door, and then you spend on other things while you're there and blah, 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 blah. Those games are kind of like that. Now, they actually turn a profit in most cases, I think. Stuff like God of War and God of War Ragnarok and all that, right? I'm sure they turned a profit. Probably, maybe a big profit. But it, um, uh, but it's a way to get people in the door. It's a way to get people in the door. And so if they don't have a place to get people in the door, then maybe they're not going to put as much effort into those games and make them, like, again, they don't really resonate with me, those particular games, right? I prefer what Nintendo is doing, but Nintendo is doing the same thing. They make games like Bonanza or Mario Kart World. Well, Mario Kart World is maybe an exception, but something like Bonanza is made so that it's like a prestige title that gets people in the door, right? And if Sony is less incentivized to do that, then maybe those games don't turn out to a level of quality or in a way that the people who enjoy them would like. So it's not entirely in your interest for those games to come to PC either. It's complicated, you know? It's very complicated. So yeah, but this is something that consumers find impossible to do in my experience. Is just that when a company is making a mistake, they don't shut the fuck up and just let them make the mistake, which is in your interest to do. Now, look, if you want the company to stay around and continue producing things, okay. But at least know what you're doing. Like when you say and do, people go online and they vent and da 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 da. When you say and you do something online, bear in mind that you are maybe trying to achieve a goal as well, right? It shouldn't just be about trying to get something off your chest or fit in with the crowd or whatever. So, yeah. But yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't think it should be this entirely adversarial thing. Just, it's not, first of all, it's not my job to tell Sony you're making a mistake by putting your games on PC. It's not my job. And a lot of the developers would enjoy it as well. That's another aspect to consider it from, is like, I'm sure, I'd say, I imagine some of the developers who work at PlayStation would be disappointed by this news that their games are going to not come to PC anymore, because PC is a platform that some people enjoy, myself included. And so maybe they liked the idea of their games getting out onto the PC and being preserved in that format and being able to be played, in sometime in the future in 8K or with better ray tracing or whatever it is. They have this vision of the game in their head about how it looks, and they can't quite get there right now on the PlayStation hardware. But at least people will be able to do that in the future, and it'll scale nicely. And so maybe it's demoralizing for the developers that the games aren't coming to PC, and that's another factor to keep in mind. So I don't envy them making this decision actually to roll back on the PC thing because maybe their developers are demoralized. It's not the only thing demoralizing them with all those live service games that were cancelled. So that's another thing is you're going to get worse output from those developers. I would hope. Like, okay, since I'm saying you can shut the fuck up and let Sony make a mistake, here's some actual advice. If any Sony executive listens to this, I'll try and be kind, because again, it doesn't have to be an adversarial thing. Cancelled an absolute shitload of live service games. The developers in that company must be very demoralized, right? So if I was one of the executives in that company and they made this hard choice to cancel all those games, what I would be thinking is, how do we take care of these employees? How do we make sure they know that they're safe, that we're looking after them? Like, probably, I don't know, maybe I'm naive because I've never had a job like that. And it's just something that I would crave, but I would imagine that a lot of this could be solved with, making sure that the working environment is nice and they're getting nice perks and that it's just still a nice place to be, regardless of what happens to your game or where your game comes out or all that. Um, that they're getting the nice office with the big pink cookie. Uh, yeah. I want to go raid the Valve office's fridge. Gabe will let me do that for naming the Steam Deck one of these days. Yeah. All right, where are we going? Take care of those employees, man. That's what I'm saying. Not even, yeah, I mean, it's just a nice thing to do anyway. Like, that's the kind of thing I would be trying to do, honestly. I know. But he says I'm not a lizard man. Yeah, I'm not. Oh, this will be a bit of a weird scene, but we'll just go down into the parking. Look at that. That's a nice car just sitting there. No, we're parked up the wrong way, but am I parked the correct way? Let's. Okay, I will, but I'll do this. I'll change the camera. How do I do that? I think that's the cinematic. No, this one, I think that'll change in a second. Maybe it'll give us a nice scene. I don't know. Thank you, Monkey. Appreciate it. Amazing videos. Thank you. I'm hoping to make more someday, soon, eventually, possibly in the near future. In the, you know, maybe before people land on the moon again. Because we're actually approaching that possibility. I thought that would go to a cinematic cam. Maybe this one does. One of them will go. Maybe it won't because it's underground. One of them changes angle after a minute. I don't know. We'll just leave it there like that. How's this stream going, by the way? Are you enjoying it? I feel like I'm still rambling, but maybe it's okay. How's it going, this stream? Is it a good idea or a bad idea? Am I weird for thinking this game is way prettier than GTA 5? No, I think that is part of the what we were talking about before. It's part of the beauty of the technology. But also there is some nice things in it. It's again partly because of the technology, but there's bloom in a interesting way. The trail stuff is kind of interesting as well. It's a good one. It's a nice stream. Okay, people are liking the stream. That's good. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I might wrap it up soon, though. I don't know. I think I've exhausted my topics. I tried to make some topics to go through, and I think that's about it. talked about Star Fox. I would like Star Fox to come back. I would like for that to be an arcadey style game. I could see, do you know what, if I had to guess, right? So I would like for it to be an arcade style game. But if I had to guess what it's going to be, I think you should look at Pikmin for an example of how they're going to approach this, because this is a bit of a spoiler for Pikmin 4. Pikmin 4 had a lot of content in it. That's definitely one way you can't fault it. Of course, I complained about the context sensitivity of the lock-on. Did somebody tell me they fixed that with an update or something? They fixed something about it with an update, but anyway, um, there's problems with it, and I prefer the games that have a timer on them, and I wish the timer itself even was more harsh because it's actually quite generous in all the games that it's in. um, but one of the things they did, slight spoiler, is when you beat it, there's an Olimar mode. So they kind of tried to split the difference by having that timer mode in the game. I'm not sure they were entirely successful with that, but it was a good idea, and I definitely appreciated it as an inclusion. So, they let you disable a lock-on now. That's great news. That would improve the game substantially for me, honestly. That's worth going back for another playthrough, I think. But yeah, they added an Olimar mode, and I could see a Star Fox game working the same way, where there is an arcade mode that takes roughly an hour or two to play through, but then there's also some other mode, and maybe the arcade mode isn't even the first one that you play, right? So that's, to be honest, I think it's kind of a middle of the road, slightly cynical, slightly weaselly, slightly not my not my tempo, not my tempo way to approach the creation of this game. But it's fairly savvy way to do it, I think. Is, if you ask me what's the best way to make a Star Fox game now, which has the chance of being commercially successful but also doesn't piss off the fan base, which also maybe tanks its chance of being commercially successful, which is maybe what happened with Metroid Prime 4. As someone who didn't play it, I don't know, but that's the impression I get. Um, then that's the way to do it. Is you have an arcade mode, which is basically just a classic Star Fox game, which is a reasonably small game for a company like Nintendo in the modern scheme of things. And then you have some other mode which is more, shall we say, padded, or lends itself more to a longer play, whether it's an open world exploration-y thing, flying around to different planets, or I don't know, I didn't play Star Fox Assault, so I don't know what that's like. Or even something like the sort of Zelda-y game that they made, which again I didn't play. I've only played some of Star Fox 2, but I've only really played Star Fox 1 and 64. Oh, and 0 as well. So, the actual Star Fox games. Because I actually like Star Fox. I can't say I'm a huge fan, but I should play them more, honestly. Because they are good. They're fun. Fun, arcadey shooting. And I would love for Star Fox to come back and become a huge franchise, especially if it managed to keep its arcade gameplay. I would love that. I think that would be a great thing for Nintendo. So, yeah. But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. What did you think of Zero? Well, I think one problem that I have with Star Fox just as a franchise is just that it's always the exact same thing in the main games, like Corneria and so on and so forth. Now, there's an extent to which, like for example, I love Ghouls and Ghosts and Goblins, right? Resurrection, I mean, and I haven't quite made my peace with the original Ghosts and Goblins. Is the implication there? Why don't I just say the implication out loud? Maybe I can come to love that game. I do intend to play it some more, but I haven't quite made my peace with that game. But I love Ghouls and Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection. Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection includes stages that are very heavily inspired from Ghouls and Ghosts, but I understand that because the two games are substantially different in many ways, and those encounters have been tweaked in a variety, in a substantial number of ways, that they're not the same game, right? They're just not the same game. And so those Star Fox games are not the same game, right? Even though they, in terms of their presentation, they have very similar things. But I can't help but feel that, you know, they're cutting themselves off from just giving me a bit more of a fresh experience, exploring some more new ideas. You know, I want to see the Star successor to Star Fox, not just Star Fox or Star Fox 64 again, right? So that's what I don't want from it. Zero was that. So actually, my bigger problem with it was I never really played it enough to get totally comfortable with the control scheme, but I don't. That's not my bigger problem with it because I think I could probably become comfortable with that and maybe even enjoy it. Um, it's just that they were retreading that ground, and I don't know why they felt compelled to do that over and over again. Especially because it does seem like Star Fox, as far as Nintendo franchises go, Star Fox maybe has more room in it for narrative expansion anyway, right? I think this is part of why people see this appeal in the IP as this seems like a more natural fit for some story in a Nintendo game, and yet they haven't really done that with it. They've just told the same story again and again. So I would hope if they do a new Star Fox game that they don't make that mistake, but we'll see how that goes. We'll see. Hit me with some questions, chat. Give me your absolute best question because I feel like I haven't been talking enough. Like, what's the point of having a sound only stream if I'm not going to talk to you a little bit more and engage a bit more? So give me your absolute best, best of the best. Although I did just do that huge, well, it was a while back now, actually, wasn't it? But did do a huge Q&A on the Patreon. If anyone wants some questions answered, take a look at the Patreon. You don't have to be a patron. There's a lot of questions answered on there. What is the meaning of life? Come on now. What will be the title of your fourth micro videos video? I'll tell you what, guess. Everybody guess. What would the fourth mega micro videos video be? To be honest, I have ideas for ones that are fairly predictable. People have predicted some. But I would be curious to see if anybody guessed what the next one is. So hit me up with a load of guesses and then I'll answer yes or no whether anybody got the guess. Matthew, I'd like to know. Right, let me see. Okay, this looks like a high quality one. Sorry. Okay, I was reading that one out, so I'll go with it. I see another one there that I haven't read it yet, but it looks like some effort went in. Okay, Matthew, I'd like to know why you think Ori 7 and 8 are better than Ori 1 to 3. Did I say that? Don't you think 7 and Village do too much unskippable cinematic stuff? I haven't really replayed them. But yeah, I imagine unskippable stuff like that would annoy me if I was going to replay them. I don't know. I mean, I like the original Resident Evils. I do. I was singing the praises of Resident Evil 2 just recently. I do like them. I don't have a particularly strong feeling one way or the other about which is better, 7, 8, or 1, 2, 3. I mean, if you asked me to give you a gut feeling on it, probably 2 is the best one of the lot of them. Then maybe 7. I don't know. I didn't find 7 that scary. Then again, I don't scare easily for games. The one exception being Alien Isolation. But yeah, I don't know. I'd probably put 8 and 3 the lowest. Like 8 was pretty good though. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a huge Resident Evil fan. I'm not a Resident Evil expert. I'm not. I like them. I like them. And I've played a lot of them, and I've been playing them since they started coming out. Um, yeah, it's kind of tempting to play some more of them. Go back through them all again. But yeah, I don't know. If I gave that impression, I didn't mean to give that impression. Anyway, so I'm going to read all over these micro video things, right? And I'm going to give you a yes or no answer whether anybody got it. Whoa, why is my chat not scrolling properly? Come on now. Where are we? Okay, I think I saw them all and nobody got it. If now look, it's all up in the air, okay? But if it is what I think it is, I kind of have, yeah, I have two different ways of following up from, well, not exactly following up, but there's no need for me to spoil it, is it, right? Part of it is just the surprise factor, so there's no need for me to spoil it. But none of you guessed it, if it's the one I'm thinking of, but it could be a different one that comes out instead. I have ideas for a bunch of them, but most of them are not very far along. And to be honest, they're a fuckload of work, and they are not something that makes the most sense to try and return to videos to. So I wouldn't expect one anytime soon. But if the next one is what I think it is, nobody got it from what I saw. Nobody simply guessed Mega Micro Videos 3, but it's not that. I saw one. What was it? I'm gonna leave it that there for the micro videos thing. How do you feel about missed opportunities in games? I feel like this line of thinking prevents people from approaching games media on their own terms, but there are instances I can agree. Yeah, that's a good question. That is a very interesting topic, and it's one that's quite relevant to. Sorry, I'm just thinking about what I want to or don't want to say. I was thinking a little bit about, I suppose I won't say this, but I was thinking a little bit about Order of the Sinking Star and the idea for that game of mixing some games together and kind of exploring the possibilities that come about. But I don't know that I mean, the game's not out yet, so I don't know enough about it. And I suppose I'm kind of approaching this in a similar way to how I talked or didn't talk about Okami 2 on a recent stream. It's just maybe I don't want to talk about it, and I have some ideas relating to this and how I imagine that could be explored in that game, for example, but I don't want to talk about that since the game's not out, and I don't want to bias anybody. That doesn't really seem fair because the game's not out. So, but it's a very relevant idea when you're making a puzzle game, actually, because one of the things which is kind of become this generally accepted part of puzzle game design in recent years is just this idea that when you make a puzzle game, it's nice if the puzzle game explores as much of its potential as makes sense, right? Or like a lot of its potential. And that's one of the things. Well, again, I've been vaguely commenting about this before, but I didn't want to do everything by the book for Logic Bombs, and I'll get into that more at a later date. But this is one of the ways in that Logic Bombs is fairly traditional, right? Because I tried to push the idea as far as I could, right? And I think the feedback that I've gotten says that I did a good job on that, that the game actually does that well, and that people enjoy how far it goes in that way, right? And so it's a very relevant topic for puzzle games because it's something that people like about puzzle games, and yet, yeah, I actually have a perfect example in mind, right? Steven Sausage Roll. Um, I think the perfect example of this being a problem, the idea of missed opportunities in Steven Sausage Roll is, um, I don't know if other people agree with me or not, but personally, I just don't like the Great Tower level. I don't like it. You know, I've gone back to replay that game. It's a great game. Okay, it's really great. But I've gone back to replay that game, and it's one of those. It's a game where you have to beat every level to advance. I don't think there's any optional levels in it. From what I remember, there's not. Um, so you got to beat the Great Tower to get through it, and I just don't like it. You know, I can understand that there's something special about it. Like I understand it being a memorable moment in the game, and that's a hard thing to generate in a puzzle game, first of all, you know. So I understand not wanting to let go of that, and maybe some people really enjoy it, okay, but I'm allowed to not like it, okay, and I don't. And but I also think it's a case where if that level wasn't in the game, you could maybe say maybe this game isn't really exploring itself fully, right? Maybe there should have been a level like this where there was just this big stack of sausages and you had to do this, you know, and roll around. So there's something about having that in the game that makes it more complete, but I think also kind of makes it worse, right? So I don't think a missed opportunity in a game is necessarily a bad thing. That said, this is one way in which puzzle games are ahead of the curve. I forget if I said this. I think I said this in the Q&A, but if I didn't, you kind of get the sense that some genres are a little bit more, let's say, advanced than others. Like the art of game design in them is maybe more figured out or just more stabilized or something, right? Puzzle games, I think, are one of those genres where they just feel like they're a little bit further along than some other genres, right? Which doesn't make them better games overall. Um, but they're just, I feel like they're kind of more figured out a little bit, okay? Um, and so their puzzle games in general are better at exploring all of their ideas than traditional games are. So I would say that most or many games are not doing a good enough job of exploring all of their opportunities, and so therefore good enough job is the wrong phrase. That's way too harsh a phrasing, but not doing an optimal or an ideal job at exploring all of their possibilities. There is, if you were to try and weigh the scales, is there not enough missed opportunities or too many missed opportunities in this game, right? In other words, were too many things put in that were bad that would have been better to be missed, or not enough, right? I think many games fall into that latter category of not enough, right? And partially because they're not puzzle games, and maybe it's more difficult to make them that way if they're not puzzle games. Um, but I'm not willing to say that a missed opportunity is necessarily a bad thing. And I agree with you in that it does hurt sometimes to judge games, um, the way people judge games, and it very much ties back into what I was talking about with Returnal, in that there's two different ways to see it. You can see the randomization as missed opportunity, and it's not good enough, right? It's nowhere near as varied as the Binding of Isaac. Man, I could play 100 runs of Isaac, and they would all feel a little bit different. If I play Returnal 100 times, it's all going to feel very samey by the end, you know. But there's a different way to view it, which is, look, it's not like that. It's more like if you want to come back to this game from time to time, it's just not going to be repetitive. You're not going to be able to memorize and brute force your way through it. So it'll keep you on your toes, and that's fun, you know? So there's two different ways to view it, and you can be more charitable or less charitable about the way you view it, you know? So I think I pretty much agree with you on that one in what you said there. Matt, do you feel guilty replaying games instead of playing something new to you? Yeah, I do sometimes, and it's not a good way to be. It's not an aspect that I like about myself, and I do wish that I replayed more stuff. It's just there is a certain amount of pressure. I try to let this job affect the way that I go about stuff as little as possible, but there is a little bit of pressure there to stay current and stay on top and find new things. You know, one of the things I do is just play games to try and find things that I'm comfortable recommending or that I feel improve my understanding of games by just being well constructed or something like that. It's like you want to I don't know, maybe it's a pretentious way to be. Um, but I think that probably the best understanding to come about how to make a good game is or just even to become a better critic or whatever is just to play good games and get them into your head and experience what the medium has to offer, you know. So I'm keen to do that. But this is another thing I said before. I was in a quick say called Deep Input for anybody who isn't familiar with it. Um, it's not the only way to understand games. In fact, if you only ever play things and then move on, you miss a lot of what makes the medium special, you know? So you have to try and strike a balance. But yeah, I do end up playing a lot of new games. There's also, it's easier for me to, as a matter of practicality, it's easier for me to replay games than it is to play new ones because replaying them can be replaying them can serve a double purpose for me because I can record the footage then. I'm not comfortable. I don't like recording my first playthrough of a game because I think it changes the way you interact with the game too much. But when I'm on a subsequent playthrough, I'm like, okay, now I can record because maybe sometimes I'm going to be testing the game out a little bit, kind of like what happened when I was doing that Ghouls and Ghosts Mega Drive research thing. Some of it's a little bit's going to be research anyway, and I'm going to be playing, and I'm going to try and enjoy it again a second time, you know. But I'm also going to be a little bit more relaxed, and I'm not worried if I'm recording and blah blah blah. So I can record them, and that can turn out to be useful for me as well. So I kind of get more value out of replaying a game in that way, if you think of it in terms of the job, you know. Um, that's I've just realized that that contradicts what I was saying because I was saying why I need to play new things. So I suppose I'm being pulled in two different directions. I just contradicted myself, but that's what you get. I suppose what I'm getting at is the missing ingredient here that actually connects these two things is here's what makes it not a contradiction, right? Um, the unspoken thing. Get ready for the unspoken truth, the horrible unspoken truth. Um, Sometimes if I'm playing a game again to get footage of it, don't get your hopes up, but something I've been doing lately is it's a game. Sometimes they're games that I don't really enjoy. So I end up replaying games that I don't really enjoy to get footage of them. And and then when it comes time to play something recreationally, the question is: are you going to replay something or are you going to play something new? And maybe I'm just a little bit burned out from replaying games that I don't enjoy. Which is, you know, there's much worse things you could be doing in life, but man, it's sometimes it's very not fun. Put it that way. Been going through that one lately. But like I said, don't get your hopes up. Because nothing comes out until it comes out. What makes the difference between a game getting a thoughts on video or being combined into a micro vids video? It's a good question. It's mostly based on the feel of it. I feel like the thoughts on videos are somewhat more like reviews, whereas the micro videos are more like using the game as a springboard to explore a topic. You know, the thoughts on videos, they do have topics in them, but sometimes it's more than one little topic, and it's not focused on this one idea really the way a micro video is. I think that's what distinguishes them. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that um, Well, I can't say for sure, but I think I have started writing scripts that have migrated from one to the other, depending on how it was turning out. So I try not to let the title or what I'm supposed to be working on influence it that much. If you start writing a thoughts on video and it turns out to be a micro video, that doesn't really matter as long as you have a place for it. That's a good thing about having multiple formats as well. That's why I'm glad that I have lots of different formats, because I can explore the game in a way that feels right for that game. So as you saw a while back, I was playing some Ghouls and Ghosts things to see if maybe I would get good footage, and I don't know if that will happen, but I think a commentary would be a nice way to explore that game rather than just a video or something like that. Because it's short, it's just one of that, and it's a game that people might like to see played that way. It's just one of those games where it makes sense. What game would you like to see a movie adaptation of? I feel like I had a good answer to this, but I don't know. A movie adaptation. I mean, it's a big question. Is it a good movie adaptation? You know, that's a big question right there. This one's interesting me, so bear with me a second if I'm quiet. Just watch the contrails on the screen and relax for a second. Been talking pretty much non-stop, even though we have those nice little visuals to chill you out a little bit. I'm gonna assume it's a good adaptation, like a really good adaptation, maybe the best adaptation you could come up with, right? Well, you see, I've talked a bit before. I've been watching more films of late. Um, there was a moment a little while back. I have to be a little bit vague, unfortunately, but there was a moment a while back where it just made sense for me to sit down and watch some films, and it just kind of got me into the habit. So I've been watching more films lately, and I rewatched some Kubrick ones again, and most of his films were adaptations, and they're all really, really fucking good. So that's the kind of adaptation I'm thinking of, where it's maybe not entirely. I don't know. That's not really fair either, because Kubrick kind of changed the source material a little bit in some ways that I think are meaningful sometimes. So maybe that's not really a fair answer to the question. But really, when you ask the question, I'm just thinking, if Kubrick was still alive, what game would I want him to adapt? What would be fun? What has the most potential? I don't know. I need the chat to help me on this one. Presumably, people are suggesting stuff. What has the most potential? Mario. Yeah, maybe a visual novel, but that's kind of easy, isn't it? I don't know. I really, really don't know. There's stuff that I just think there's no point in adapting, like Shadow of the Colossus or The Last Guardian or something like that. There's just no point. Uh, ooh, I have a good answer. Okay, I have my answer. Okay, if Kubrick was to make a film, now it's not based. Okay, can it be based on a franchise rather than any one? Um, Based on a franchise rather than any one game? Does it matter? There's not really any rules, is it? Because we're just having a fucking chat. So, okay, it's going to be based on a franchise. Okay, and it's a Kubrick film. Okay, Shin Megami Tensei. Can adapt whatever one he wants or make a new one. I want to see the Kubrick Shin Megami Tensei film. That's what I would want to see. I think of the video game properties that exist, that one would not be so far out of his wheelhouse. Yeah, people are enthusiastic about the idea. He is mad. Actually, I've never given my maddest take on stream. I keep forgetting to. So I'm gonna give it to you now, right? This is the one that you're gonna say he is absolutely insane. Okay. Uh, so one person in the chat will get it, and nobody else will get it. Okay. To talk about Death Stranding, um, as you know, I think that Kojima has made a huge mistake by putting people into his games and using their likeness. I don't like it. I think that if an actor is in something, they should be able to just take on whatever likeness they like, and it should be about their performance. Okay, so bear that in mind for what I'm about to say. But I don't think Norman Reedus is actually bad in Death Stranding games, but I don't think he's particularly good in them either. To be honest with you, I don't think he's particularly bad. Um, but I do think there's probably someone out there that would be better suited for it, right? Probably like a few people. Yeah. So you put me in charge of casting Death Stranding, okay? Who would I cast as Sam? This is this is my maddest take ever, okay? And it's gonna be so funny. Who would I cast as Sam if I was in charge of Death Stranding? Okay? It's my maddest take ever, but I'm gonna explain it and you're gonna come around. Jonah Hill. Jonah Hill. I would have cast Jonah Hill as Sam in Death Stranding. Yeah. Now, to those of you who doubt me, to those of you who doubt that's like one of the biggest reactions I've ever gotten out of chat. To those of you who doubt me, those of you who doubt me have probably not watched the miniseries called Maniac, which was on Netflix. And I rewatched that for the first time since it came out, not so long ago. It's really good. I recommend it. I wouldn't say it's an absolute top tier show for me. But if you doubt my Jonah Hill pick, watch Maniac on Netflix. And then see where I'm coming from with that pick. I think he would have played the part really well. Right? Maybe this is why I'm not a casting director, because basically what I'm doing is I'm seeing a performance that he already made and then saying it would be nice for you to do that performance again, right? Or something like that performance again. But yeah, the way he acts in Maniac is really good. I don't know how else to put it. Basically, in Maniac, he's just an extremely depressed guy, and he just has this really flat affect. It's not what you think of when you think of Jonah Hill. This is why I knew you would all laugh. It's not what you think of when you think of Jonah Hill, right? And he gives an absolutely fantastic performance in the whole series. So I think that he could have brought that kind of energy. I'm not saying he would have had to do the exact same thing, but I think he could have brought that kind of energy to Sam. And I think he would have done. There's an element of Sam's character in the game which I honestly don't really like all that much about these games. So maybe this is why I'm trying to steer away from it. That's a really good point, actually, Fonal. Yeah, Kubrick cast Malcolm McDowell in Clockwork Orange after seeing him in If, and yes, he is kind of similar in If. Yeah. I think I think you could say the same thing about Jack Nicholson and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Not quite the same thing, right? But he showed up in the Shining not long after giving a performance as a crazy-ish guy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So maybe it's not such a strange casting way to do casting. Um, but yeah, if you watch him in Maniac, he's really, really good. And there's a sense in which Sam in Death Stranding is he's supposed to be kind of a cool guy and whatever. I don't like that aspect of the game. I don't think it suits the type of game that it's trying to be. And he's I don't know. So Jonah Hill would probably embody a certain aspect of the character a bit worse than Norman, you know. But I think he would embody the character of just wants to be left alone and wants to stay away from people and just isn't into it and doesn't care and isn't invested in those kinds of things until, of course, the story of the game, the emotions get pulled out of him as it goes on and he forms a bond with BB and blah 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 blah. I think all of that would have been probably portrayed better by Jonah Hill than it was by Norman Reedus. That's just my take. I don't think Norman is horrible as Sam, but I don't really like him in the role either, if I'm being honest. I think he's definitely been overshadowed in both games by definitely first of all by Mass, but in the second game, your man is not in it as much, but the guy who plays, because I suppose I won't spoil it, but the guy, the guy I'm talking about in the second game, who was in a similar role. Uh, I thought he gave a really good performance, but yeah. Anyway, so if you laughed, give Maniac a shot. There's a Netflix miniseries, and it was very, very good. It was a very good series, but Jonah Hill's performance in it was one of the good things in it as well. But it's just a great series in general. So, but yeah, Shim. But the most important thing is Shin Megami Tensei by Kubrick. I think actually you could take I think a bunch of Katsura Hoshino's, is it Hashino or Hoshino? Katsura Hashino. A bunch of his games uh, would be ripe for some kind of Kubrick adaptation, I think, because they have some kind of thematic resonance in them. They're trying to say something, and personally speaking, I don't think they go far enough. I find them I find him to be kind of a frustrating creator in some ways because I appreciate that he's. I don't want to say his games are bad or anything. They're definitely not. I enjoy them all, but I feel like they're never quite fully there. Um, but at least he's trying, right? Which is not true for a lot of game developers. And I think that's an even bigger problem in Japan is they do try to kind of steer away from anything that could be controversial in that way. Most of the time, anyway. There's definitely exceptions. Elaborate on Kubrick's SMT. I don't know, man. I don't know. I think it would have to have a young man protagonist at the very least, right? No matter what one it was adapting. So the main character is probably a young man. So it's got to be some young male actor. I don't know many. Oh yeah, you asked that earlier and I meant to answer it. Maybe this is one reason why SMT was on the brain. A while back you said the SMT games are a guilty pleasure for you. Could you elaborate on this? Thank you. I mean that's kind of a harsh way to put it. So maybe I retract it a little bit. I just think the combat's not that great, is it? In the grand scheme of things, it's good compared to a lot of JRPGs, but yeah, I know exactly what I could say about this. I need to. I don't want to spoil theory videos, so yeah. I just remembered. I actually do have a bit about this in a theory video that I could talk about. Um, and this is honestly, this is one reason why I haven't been streaming and I haven't been doing very much because it's kind of frustrating for me because there's things that I feel like I want to express in theory videos first, but man, they're a big fucking undertaking. So what am I supposed to do? Just like sit around and not talk about anything until then? Especially when I was trying to make a game in the middle of it all, you know. And but set that aside, you know, the stories are not maybe as fleshed out as the characters are not as fleshed out as they could be. They're just not all the way there in some way that I appreciate when games are, you know. But I enjoy them all. What I'm saying is I enjoy playing a Shin Megami Tensei game all the same. I enjoy playing it, right? I'm not just getting through it for the story because the story's not that big a deal in most of them. um, they just have an enjoyable loop where you go through the fusion and then you go through the combat, and the combat has a little bit of depth to it with the press turn thing, even if it's also a bit repetitive. Um, but at least things can go wrong and you have to adapt to them and blah blah blah. So they're engaging even if they're not entirely put together in a way that I mean that's the way I approach games, isn't it? When I'm talking about games, I'm talking about trying to ensure that they're put together in some kind of sound coherent way that holds up to some level of scrutiny that SMT maybe doesn't survive. Do you know what I mean? But uh, but they're still enjoyable games all the same. They have a really nice tone, and I also think there is something about them that is. I think maybe this is why I was drawn to the series as my pick for the Kubrick adaptation was because individually all the stories seem kind of. I was gonna say stupid, but that's way too harsh. But they seem a little bit lackluster on their own, taken one by one, or maybe they're just not as fleshed out in some way as a JRPG story tends to be. But then again, the way that JRPGs are fleshed out is often very trivial, I think, with a bunch of trivialities that kind of don't really matter in the end. And blah, 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 I don't know. But there's something about if you've actually somebody let me know if I'm crazy here or not. But if you've played multiple SMT games, do you feel that it kind of resonates more with you after you play a few of them? Like you kind of see it better. You kind of see what the developers are going for better. It seems shallower the first time through, but when you go through it a few times, you think maybe it's not as shallow as you think. You know, maybe there is something. Yeah, there's like a big picture. Yeah, that comes across a bit better. I don't know. Yeah, Persona's not the same way because they all have such very different points. Mm. Yeah, I need to make some more theory videos. Anyway, I think I may have run out of steam for this stream. I don't know what else to say. What else do I say, fellas? Fellas. I'm not even reading the chat. But I hope it was a good stream all the same. Which SMT should I start with after having played all the Hashino Persona games? You can start with 3, 4, or 5 Vengeance. I do not recommend starting with 4 Apocalypse because that's a follow-up to 4, or the original version of 5. If you get really into the series and you want to see the comparisons, if you're someone like me who is trying to fact check things and get really deep into the weeds, then the original version of 5, you might want to play it, but I really wouldn't recommend it. You basically get that included as part of Vengeance as well. So if you want, what you can do is you can boot up Vengeance, and then at the start you're given a choice to take a girl's hand or not. If you don't take her hand, you're playing the original version of SMT5, but with some important gameplay improvements, like the level scaling was totally fucked in the original version of the game, and it's just a huge improvement to have that not be so impactful. And I'm still so glad they made that change, man. So many times I have some tiny little quibble with a game that I think is ruining it, and it never gets addressed, and I'm still in disbelief that that got addressed. So I feel worried I'm spamming this, but I just wanted to say, as an example of games that build upon being sequels, Banjo-Tooie starts you with all the moves you learn in Kazooie and builds from there. Yeah, I think I knew that once upon a time, but I don't think I've ever played Tooie. Played a good bit of the first one, but I didn't have an N64, so I haven't played Tooie. I will get around to that at some point. I always wanted to play Nuts and Bolts as well. I know a lot of people said it was bad, but I always wanted to play it and see for myself. I think there was at least 1 or 2 other rare games that I want to play that I never got the opportunity to. I can't think of them off the top of my head. It's okay to do a medium light spam of something, because I miss a lot of stuff in the chat. I get that. So I appreciate you bringing that to my attention, because it's a good point. I want Okami 2 to start the same way. Kami is going to come through, I believe. If he comes through, it might not be in that exact way, but I want Okami 2 to start that way. If Okami 2 starts and the first 5 to 10 hours is just you getting all of those abilities back again, that's going to suck. I just don't see any way to make that good. Watch any good films lately? Yeah, I talked about a bunch of them. I'm not sure if I talked about it on stream, but I watched some of Sean Baker's films, which I thought were good. I watched The Flora Project, Anora, and Red Rocket. Thought they were all good. They're not exactly my type of film in that they're kind of like documentary-ish, things. They kind of feel like just having a window into somebody's life for a little while, even though they're fiction. Um, but I'm glad that they're getting made. And I thought they were all very good. I'd be fine with that as well, as I only knew brush techniques for Okami 2. That's fine by me. She's definitely going to have the ability to summon the sun, though. There's no way she's not going to have that. So that's one. And you probably need the power slash as well. That's two. I think I could see them dropping most of the others, but seen any Robert Altman films? No, I don't think I have. I don't have any ideas for another comparison video, no. If one happens, it happens, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to never see one of them again. Are you still considering covering Outer Wilds in some capacity? Well, I was never going to do a proper review on it. I still haven't played the DLC for that. I wouldn't say that I'm inclined to I wouldn't say that I'm inclined to do anything on it. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed Tar. It's great. It's really, really great. There's a lot to pick apart in Tar, but I will just say, as somebody who's not really a cinephile, I have watched a good number of films, I would say. I've watched more films than most people, probably. Maybe that's not true. But I have watched a lot of films. So there's probably things in that film that I wasn't picking up on, but I just really like that film and I kind of want to talk about it, but I don't want to do it. I would like to do it justice if I was going to do that. Like sit down and really think about it. One thing I would like to point out though, just since it came up, there's one thing I picked up on, even though I don't have a huge amount of cinema knowledge in it. This is a kind of a spoiler for Tar. So it does happen fairly late into the film. It's at least halfway through into the film, but it's not a huge spoiler. But it's there's a scene in it where I recognized it, and I was happy that I recognized it because I feel like this has to have been done on purpose. I'm still not entirely sure what the meaning of it was, but I feel like it has to have been done on purpose. But there's a scene that only lasts about 2 or 3 minutes, probably about halfway through the film, where she just steps into a Tarkovsky film. She just steps into Stalker for 2 or 3 minutes, and then that's it. We never see that again. I feel like it was on purpose. The thing that really tips it over the edge is the black dog that appears. It's the exact same breed of dog that's in Stalker. And so when you see the dog and then you just reflect on the environment that she was just walking through, she's just walking through this ruined, kind of rundown apartment building with a load of water on the ground. It's such a Tarkovsky image. Something about, like, for whatever reason, he just seemed to love sort of rundown buildings with water in them, you know? Like a puddle of water, like just puddle of water on the floor for whatever reason. And she just steps into Stalker for about 2 minutes and then steps out. And I think I have some ideas about why that's in the film. Um, but yeah, I just think it's a film that has a lot of love and care put into it, you know? So yeah, it's intertextual. Yeah, I've been thinking about intertextuality lately. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but I don't know. I say I'm not a huge fan of it, but you know, it's just maybe there's something in my blood as an Irishman. Ulysses came out and it's never been the same, you know? Yeah, it is kind of unavoidable. I think there's a way of leaning on it, which I'm not a huge fan of. But yeah, I don't know where to go here. Let's see if that gives us the cinematic view now. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Intertextuality feels a bit of a dead end to me. I think it's giving into the mind's inability to produce true originality, but I'm not sure dropping the ego for desire of that is honestly best. Oh, sorry, I'm not just reading this to myself, I'm reading this for posterity, right? Intertextuality feels a bit of a dead end to me. I think it's giving into the mind's inability to produce quote unquote true originality, but I'm not sure dropping the ego for the desire of that is honestly best. You made me think about something. We're going all in on the philosophy this time, right? There's something. Got carjacked? Maybe I'll just stand around anyway. There, we can admire the Hawaiian shirt. Look at that. Um, maybe it's for the best to happen because it's kind of a nice scene anyway. Uh, yeah. So you said it. It's giving into the mind's inability to produce true originality, and just trying to get the camera to stop freaking out there. I don't know. Anyway, that opinion goes back at least to Descartes, is my understanding of it. This was basically one of the things. I think it's in his famous treatise where he said, you know, I think therefore I am. But it's kind of a different argument. But he was talking about how uh, human beings essentially can't produce anything new. We can only produce things that already exist. You know, you can't really. The idea is like try and come up with some kind of creature. You know, you look at a creature, let's say in Rain World, and you say, well, it's kind of a vulture and it's kind of like this gas bag thing that you would maybe see in the ocean or whatever. And it's not really it's not really original, you know. I don't really have a philosophical basis for arguing on this, but I couldn't help but wonder if maybe Descartes got it the wrong way around. I don't know if anybody has pointed this out. Presumably somebody has in about 400 years or something like that. But Um, Maybe it's not the case that we can't produce anything original. Maybe it's the case that we can't recognize the originality in our own creations, you know? It doesn't seem to me like there's any way to distinguish between those two arguments or to decide that one of them is right and one of them is wrong. Maybe there is something about maybe there is something about Slugcat. Yeah, kind of slug, kind of cat. Maybe there is something about Slugcat that is unique in a way that we're not primed to see, that we can't see because we are just, you know, driven to think of it as a slug and a cat thing. You know, we're just drawn to comparison. So we can't actually see the originality in the things that we create. It doesn't actually solve any problems though. You know, it doesn't for the just saying this isn't going to make the average person go, "Oh wow, suddenly I see all the originality and creativity that's around me every day." It doesn't work like that, you know. I'm talking about something that's probably hardwired into us. But I think maybe he got that backwards. Maybe. So I just feel our minds are limited, you know? We're not seeing everything the way it truly is all the time. So so I don't really buy that argument. But it's kind of like a distinction without a difference, right? Because like I said, it doesn't change the way people interact with things and view them, and it's not going to make anybody more impressed by Slugcat or whatever. Samba Pamba, I won't read the whole comment, but basically disagrees about intertextuality. I assume you're disagreeing with me. Maybe I shouldn't maybe I gave a wrong impression. Um, I'm not saying that intertextuality is always bad. I'm saying that it's not my preferred way of seeing meaning being constructed in a work. Um, or at least there's ways of doing it which are not to my taste, I suppose. I'll give you another example to go back to Tar, where this kind of originated in the discussion. There's a part in Tar where they discuss Schopenhauer and his views on women and stuff like that. And I forget if this is mentioned in the film. I think it probably is. Um, but Schopenhauer has a treatise on noise, which is very relevant to the film Tar. But anyway, that's probably directly referenced in the film. But you see, the thing is, to the extent that the film might tackle or deal with or respond to or embody some of Schopenhauer's ideas, um, at least it's that intertextuality is not really a problem for me because basically the characters in the film discuss Schopenhauer a little bit and bring that into the fold in a way, you know? Um, there's other methods of doing it um, that are not so good. Like, I'm not a big reader. I want to read more. You know, I would like to. Um, yeah, but maybe I'm just not well versed enough. But I mean, this is one of the things that I don't really like all that much about Nabokov's books is that part of the fun he was having in the books was kind of creating little puzzles and doing little sort of anagrams and weird little hiding little secrets and things in his books. And he got satisfaction out of that, and that's cool. But there's literary allusions in there that just seem kind of, I don't know. He was a great writer, but some of the illusions in the books just seem like maybe they didn't need to be there, you know, like they didn't really improve it. They just made me think, oh, I'm missing out on something here, but I don't know. No, I think he's a great writer. I do think he's a great writer. It's just that that's one habit that about his that bothers me. Also, this is maybe a much more relatable habit to everybody, but also he brings up Freud a lot because Freud lives rent free in his head for some reason. So, I mean, that was just a bad habit for him to just bring that up all the time. Anyway, so there's ways of doing intertextuality that don't quite resonate with me, and uh, and there's ways of doing it that do resonate with me. But I'm saying, I think part of the reason I feel the need to clarify here is, let's just be honest, is um, I feel like there's an impulse in me that's driven towards that, even though it's maybe not exactly what I want to do, given the choice of everything that I would like to do. I feel like I maybe have ideas that are intertextual in a way, which is good and worth pursuing. But if you gave me the choice to be a creative who didn't use that stuff as much, then I would probably opt for that. Do you get me? And maybe this is just an unavoidable part of having transitioned from being a critic to a developer or whatever, because like I said, it's like the Descartes thing. It's maybe not necessarily that I can't make anything original, but I can't recognize it as original. I don't know. So I actually think like if I make more games, then you probably will see some intertextual stuff in them, you know? Um, I would hope they have more going on than that though. And I would hope that the intertextuality of them was good in some way. That felt. This is kind of fun in its own way, watching the NPCs go by. What do you think about games adapting books like The Witcher? Well, it worked out for them. People even seem to like the story of The Witcher games. I've never really played them, so. Do you have a horror film recommendation? Um, yeah, I'm gonna be a hypocrite. I've actually already been a hypocrite because I praised Begonia, which is a remake, and I haven't watched the original. So everybody's got their preferred medium where they're very passionate and all that. But yeah, um, I imagine that the original version of Begonia is good, and probably Begonia is good in its own ways as well. And like I said, Kubrick adapted stuff, although he did tend to put his own spin on things, from what I understand. But so the remake that came to mind is Suspiria, the Suspiria remake that came out a while back. I haven't seen the original, but I liked that one. Part of the reason I liked it is because I think horror films tend to be lacking substance. And this is kind of like what I was saying about Sean Baker's films. Now, that's way too harsh a thing for them to say that they lack substance. They're really, really great films, actually. But I tend to be drawn more towards things that just have a stronger theme to them, that are more obviously trying to say something and maybe folding in more meaning into them rather than just being about a kind of. Those Sean Baker films are more kind of experiential in a sense that you're supposed to sit down and just absorb somebody else's life for a while, and maybe that makes you reflect on your own life or the differences or how you might do if you were in their shoes and that kind of stuff. And that's really cool. It's a good use of the medium and all that, right? But uh, it's not exactly my preferred type of film. So the same is true for horror. I'm not going to a horror film looking exactly to be scared, and I feel like Suspiria was a horror film that had a little bit more thematic substance to it, you know? Yeah, I don't really know. To be honest, I'm kind of forgetting what I took away from Suspiria in the first place, but I just remember that it had more to it. So yeah, the political stuff is not exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about that. The political stuff wasn't what I liked about the Banshees of Inisherin either. I almost feel like that's a red herring in the film, to be honest with you. The Civil War happening on the main, not exactly a red herring, but it's not really like trying to interpret the film through that lens is not really. I don't think you're going to get all that far with it. Let me put it that way. It's really just. It's more like a dramatic irony in that film. I think that you have these two people who were friends and now they're at odds with each other, and that the same thing is happening on a larger scale on the mainland. But I'm trying to think of more horror films because there was other ones. I feel like the horror genre has kind of bounced back a little bit lately. I enjoyed Weapons, but I can't say that it was phenomenal or anything. I wouldn't say it's one of those films that has a lot of thematic substance. Um, I'm not really a fan of Robert Eggers. No, I've more or less enjoyed all of his films. I do think all of his films are at least good. But they always just feel like they're missing something. They feel like they're missing that key element that can't quite get them over the edge into being something really great for me. And yeah, I watched Nosferatu and I felt the same way about it. I was really, really enjoying Nosferatu in the beginning. Um, I forget how long it takes, but say like the first half an hour or so, I thought that was really, really good. And then I feel like his films don't quite stick the landing for me, you know? I want them to succeed because I think he's really trying and really, there's elements to the films that are great, the production of them and all that. But they're not quite coalescing for me in some way that's hard to put into words. I do want to watch The Lighthouse again though, because I know people keep pushing me on that one. I watched it already, and I think if any of his films have um, better thematic substance to chew on, it's probably that one. So yeah, I wish there was more time in the castle as well. Yeah, I really like that part of the film. What are some recent horror films? Can somebody list off some recent horror films? Because I feel like I remember being so disappointed by horror films for quite a while that I would just dread watching another one. And then there's been a few of them lately that have been good, like Suspiria and Thank you. The Substance was also good. Yes, that's one that for lack of a better word, it has some substance to it. Um, the Substance was good. Yeah. I haven't seen Sinners or Frankenstein. The new Alien movie. Did I watch that one? I'm not sure. The Substance is good. Nobody said. Well, The Substance was one. I feel like there's The Substance is one, but I feel like there's one more good horror film lately. But The Substance was very good. I'll just stand here and watch the skyline. I think. Chat, you didn't tell me you were in this game. What the fuck? Yeah, that's kind of a nice little vista there. Yeah, Weapons was good. Weapons wasn't as good as Suspiria or thing. It didn't have as much as the substance. It didn't have as much substance as the substance. But Long Legs. Okay, I haven't seen that one. Yeah, I feel like there was one more, but yeah, the substance was very good. I enjoyed that a lot. Um, yeah, not a big horror fan though. Are you a fan of Outdoor Boys? I don't know what that is. Yeah, I did watch Beau is Afraid. That's another one I was really enjoying at the start, and it kind of fell apart for me as it went on. I thought the first 20 minutes of that were fantastic. Matthew, I'm sure this comes up in every stream, but do you ever think about how you basically pioneered a genre of YouTube, potentially pushing forward the site in general? I don't think that's true. That's just not true, man. I'm not going to say I haven't been influential. I know I have, but that's overstating it a good bit, I think. Do you like Korean movies? I do. That was one I watched. Memories of Murder. That's not really a horror film, is it? Um, I watched Memories of Murder, and that was good. I also watched No Other Choice, which was fantastic. Fantastic. But yeah, Memories of Murder was very good as well. Yeah, I enjoyed The Handmaiden. I like No Other Choice more, but The Handmaiden was good as well. Still have a few of his films to watch, but he's really good. Park Chan Wook, that's his name. Park Chan Wook, yeah. Okay, Look Back. I'll keep that in mind. The House in Fata Morgana, Aaron. The House in Fata Morgana. Yeah, I've seen Burning. I want to rewatch that one at some point. To be honest, I didn't love it. I thought it was good now. I didn't love it. I feel like I might enjoy it more on the second watch. So I don't want to be unfair to it. I think that one might click with me a bit better on a second watch. Um, yeah. Another foreign film I watched is Drive My Car, which was also very good. I don't watch that many foreign films, but some very clever scenes in it. A great example of intertextuality, actually, as well, since that came up. There's a really strong example of intertextuality. Aren't the majority of movies porn to you? Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, I said I was running out of steam an hour ago. Well, I am though. I've slowed down a lot. Maybe we're just hanging out a bit. Oh, that's a good question. How much non-hope do you have in the Zelda movie? I'll wrap up with this one, okay? 'Cause we'll get back to games, but we'll branch off movies back to games. Uh, I have no hope whatsoever for it. I think probably at best it'll be okay. I don't know who's making it, actually. So, um, maybe they have a good guy, good director on it. I don't know. I think at best it'll be okay. I think I ended up watching the Mario film years after it came out, and it was on streaming, so I threw it on. And I don't know, man. It I didn't think it was particularly good. There's I'll tell you another one people are right about, which is kind of surprising. Because people talk about kids' films and sometimes they're wrong or whatever, or just animated films in general. I'm not saying it was amazing. I didn't truly love this film, but I watched Puss in Boots Last Wish, is that what it's called? I watched that ages ago. And and that's a good film, right? Now it's an animated film and kids are supposed to be able to enjoy it as well. But it's like what I said about the films in general. You can watch it as an adult and there's actually something to it. And there's artistry to it. And you know, um my point is though that okay, kids maybe don't want all that stuff, but it's still good for kids to take on board media that has positive qualities to it. Do you know what I mean? And maybe really really young children aren't going to sit down and watch Spirited Away or something. I don't know, but you can there's things that you can get children to watch that have a little bit more in them. I feel like the Mario film didn't have any of that, and I don't know. I didn't think it was a good film, but then again, it's just a Mario film, so it's not really going to be that damaging to the brand. I think Zelda is a different beast, and I think I'm not saying that it's going to blow the brand up or anything like that, but I think the mismatch between the reception that a Zelda film is likely going to get and what the Zelda series actually is to games is just so that gap is just so enormously huge that Nintendo should not be inviting that to happen to the Zelda series. I think Zelda should probably be off limits for films for them. Make Star Fox film. Make something make a Metroid film, right? I love Super Metroid, but Metroid is not quite in the same ballpark as Zelda, you know? It's just when you look at the history of games, when you look at the history of games, right? Not Nintendo, games, you have to include several Zelda titles in that history, or you're not getting a full picture, right? The film is not going to be anywhere near that level. It's just not going to go anywhere near that ballpark. So it's just too big a gap, I think. It's too big a gap, you know? And I don't see them doing it well for that reason. Maybe I'll be surprised. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love for it to come out and be a great film, but I just don't see it happening. I think even a good film will kind of tarnish the Zelda brand ever so slightly, to be honest with you. Just because like you just like, to put my lizard man suit on one last time, when you have people out in the world thinking about the Zelda series, right? Do you want a mediocre film to be the first thing to pop into your head? Or do you want people to think Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild and all those other games? Oh yeah, what an incredible series, you know? I can't believe how long Nintendo has been keeping that series fresh and keeping it alive, and it's relevant, you know? It's been relevant for so many eras of games, and that's quite an astonishing feat, isn't it? Or do you want the first image to pop into people's minds to be that mediocre film that they forgot about the next day? Because the sad thing is, for a lot of people, when they go and they see the Zelda film, that will be the thing that pops into their head when they think about Zelda. So that is just not a smart move for Nintendo. But, you know, no amount of protest from me is going to stop them from making that mistake. So, yeah, good chance. Isaiah says it won't even be mediocre. I agree. There's a good chance it won't even be mediocre. I think there's a good chance it'll be hard to watch. But, you know, I'm not rooting for their failure or anything like that. So, anyway, we got back around to games in the end. Thank you for all those copies of Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. Appreciate it earlier, everybody. And appreciate the patrons as well. I gotta try and remember to say that because it's otherwise just not fair for people to, you know, it's more fun to buy a copy of Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour or Super Mario Bros. Wonder plus Meet Up at Bell Bell Park Nintendo Switch 2 edition than it is to pay for food, let's say. But yeah, appreciate it. I hope this was a good stream. I don't know if Jonah Hill last link. Yeah, I hope this was a good stream. I don't know if this is a format I'll repeat. Maybe you can, in the comments, you can pitch games that you think would be nice to just have vistas on in the background for chatting like this again. I don't know if or when I'd ever do another vivisection or anything either. Not sure what games to tackle for that. But anyway, appreciate it, everyone. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And I'll see you next time, whenever that is, okay?